Chapter 685. About 5 minutes of buffer time. What could he do in such a huge imperial city? Tangen's choice was very firm. After rushing out of the hall, he headed west, heading straight for the western part of the city. At this time, the forces that were chasing him had not yet reacted. The only ones who could follow him were a few strong men from the northern wilderness who had caught up from the beginning. Unfortunately, because they were only accompanying their young master to a banquet, they didn't have a space level that could fly. As a result, even though they saw Tangen's fleeing figure at the first moment, the result was that they were getting further and further away from him. In just a short while, there was only the twilight of the night left. In the evening, on the main road leading to the western part of the city, there was an endless stream of carriages and pedestrians. Everything was as usual. Suddenly, bang. The ground in the middle of the road suddenly exploded. It was a pothole that looked like a footprint, but at this time, no one was passing by. Then, a carriage just happened to run there. Hiss! Before the coachman could react, he saw the horse he was controlling instantly rearing up and neighing loudly. Then, the rolling wheels rushed forward with inertia and crashed into the upright horse. The carriage and horse instantly flew out, crashing into the pedestrians and carriages on the side of the road. Screams, roars, screams. In a short time, several carriages that could not stop in time crashed into each other. The orderly traffic on the road was paralyzed in an instant, and chaos spread. No one knew the cause of this tragic accident, because at this time, the initiator had already crossed to another street. No one would know that this accident was just a small prelude to tonight's chaos in the Imperial City. He did not turn back, did not use any means of transportation such as horses, and did not even move along the fixed road. In this short sprint in a straight line, Tang In only believed in his speed. Go. It had only been a few minutes, but Tang In, who had increased his speed to the limit of his body, had already begun to pant slightly. However, his gaze was still calm and tranquil. He swept past the surrounding buildings and pedestrians that were rapidly retreating and accurately stepped on the next explosive point of his leg. Bang! Gravel flew everywhere, and another hole was left in the ground. His speed increased by a few notches, and in an instant he rushed out like a hurricane. Right at this moment, an orange-red firework suddenly exploded in the night sky behind them with a bang. The light was so dazzling that it could be seen for several kilometers. Tang In glanced sideways and narrowed his long and narrow eyes. Then he withdrew his gaze and rushed into the western district without looking back. At the same time, all the citizens of the Imperial City looked up at the familiar orange smoke and stopped in their tracks. Wasn't this the Imperial City alarm that had just lit up a month ago? Could it be that there was another rebellion? It was the same fireworks, but what ordinary people saw was just a simple alarm and wild guesses. But in the eyes of some of the Imperial City's garrison forces, the meaning of these fireworks was extremely clear. Soon, a large number of soldiers rushed to the western district. At this time, in a luxurious carriage that had just driven to the western district, a white hand lifted the curtain. The person in the carriage looked up at the sky. The orange fireworks were reflected on the smooth mirror, and she was speechless. This is the first level warning signal of the Wild Eagle tribe? Sigh, looks like they're really going to go all out this time. Tiger, who was also in the carriage, shook his head and sighed as he bandaged his wounded right hand. Grand Wilderness City had a very special status among the northern wilderness tribes. Thus, the guards here weren't like the Imperial Palace, where everyone was from the serious royal family. Instead, all the large tribes had sent people to guard this place. This orange signal was no doubt sent by the Wild Eagle tribe's powerful fighters. Their intention was naturally to gather the tribe's forces to encircle and kill that brand. Hearing this, Lan Sha pursed his lips and didn't say anything. His limpid eyes looked down and fixed on the western district. His smooth, jade-like face was a little confused but also a little enlightened. Entering the library to look up information, using the excuse of kissing Bao Yuping away, ignoring my surveillance arrangements. So, you were already prepared to escape. But why? You can have everything if you stay in the northern wilderness. Isn't that enough? Tiger glanced at Lan Sha's expression and misunderstood. Smiling bitterly, he said, Lambit is crushed into minced meat. He can't be any more dead. We're in big trouble this time. I was the one who organized the banquet. Protecting that brand was your idea. Sigh. He heaved a faint sigh as he stroked the cloth wound on his hand, upon which a sense of relief welled up in his heart. Thank goodness that Bran attacked us in front of so many people. Just based on this, there's still a chance. As long as we... No. No. Lon Shah turned to look at Tiger's wounded right hand and shook his head. He only denied it softly, not intending to explain. She was very clear about Twain's strength. How could a person who could even kill a Void Realm cultivator attack two weak people and fail to succeed? Plus, he clearly had a better chance, but he only attacked after the fox girl screamed, and everyone came back to their senses. Tiger naturally didn't know the inside story. Hearing this, he pondered for a while. Unable to understand, he shook his head and said, "No matter what, he won't be able to escape this time. This is the imperial city of the northern wilderness. Now that the wild eagle tribe is envious again. I hope he dies on the spot. Otherwise, it'll be big trouble." Hearing this, Lon Shah frowned slightly. Biting his lips, his eyes clouded over. Tiger was right. If Tang was killed by the wild eagle tribe, then everything would be settled. At most, the tribes would argue with each other. There would be some impact, but it wouldn't be unmanageable. But if Twain was captured alive, then there would be too many variables. Whether it was him who took the initiative to confess, or some people with ulterior motives, it was very likely that their tribe would be implicated. At that time, it would really be a big problem. Therefore, in comparison, Tiger naturally hoped that Tang wouldn't implicate them. He would die on the spot and be done with it. Lan Shan naturally understood this. But for some reason, when she heard Tiger's hopeful words, even though it was the best result, she still felt unhappy. Putting down the curtains, Lan Sha pursed his lips and shook his head slightly. "You don't understand. He won't be captured so easily, and he won't die so easily." His tone was slow, but there was great confidence in his calmness. Tiger was stunned. He instantly thought of the rumor in the library a few days ago. He couldn't help but look at Lan Sha strangely. At this moment, as if to prove Lan Sha's confidence, suddenly, boom, 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 like the rapid thunder before a storm, it exploded near and far. As soon as it started, it kept exploding in a way that caught people off guard. It didn't stop at all. It wasn't raining now, and the snow was about to stop. Naturally, it couldn't be thunder. Whoosh! The curtains suddenly opened again. Tiger poked his head out and looked to the west. Suddenly, his mouth opened and his eyes widened. His feminine face was filled with shock and fear. Motherf asterisk cur. In the direction of the west city, streaks of fiery light soared into the sky along with a muffled thunder, connecting to the pitch-black night sky. Instead, it was as if there were countless black dragons swimming in the clouds. Suddenly, they opened their mouths and spat out scorching fire snakes, causing people to tremble all over. It was terrifying and spectacular. He roared, "Hurry, hurry, hurry." In the west of the city, the first to discover Tang was not the powerhouses of the Wild Eagle tribe, but a group of ordinary soldiers. This was also normal. Under Twain's terrifying speed, those experts had long been left behind by 8th Streets. On the other hand, the soldiers of the fierce Eagle tribe were guarding the West City Gate had coincidentally bumped into Twain the moment they entered. This wasn't a remote road, but it was empty now. The people who had experienced the previous rebellion saw the fire snakes shooting up into the sky and heard the deafening explosions right next to their ears. They had long since retreated into their houses. Of course, they were people from the northern wilderness. It was impossible for them to hide under their beds and tremble. They usually grabbed a metal rod and leaned against the window, vigilantly watching the situation outside. Therefore, on this empty street, when the soldiers suddenly saw Tang someone who looked like a brand, they instantly identified their target. "Huyana, stop! Are you kidding me?" Tang naturally wouldn't listen. His footsteps paused, and he instantly changed direction and rushed into a nearby alley. The alley was about 5 feet wide. There were traces of footsteps on the thick snow in the middle of the road, but the layer of snow under the corner of the wall was intact. This was natural. After all, not many people would be so bored as to walk around the corner of the wall. Of course, it wouldn't work if there were too many people. The group of soldiers who chased and formed a line of 3 people, which just happened to fill up the alley. At this moment, Tang Yin, who was running in front, suddenly stopped. He turned around and spread out his hands. "Hey, don't blame me for not warning you. Don't chase anymore." Most of the ordinary soldiers didn't understand Brand's language. When they saw Tang Yin suddenly stop, they were overjoyed. They shouted in indistinct barbarian language and hastened their footsteps. "You don't understand? Oh, then it's a tragedy." As soon as he finished speaking, boom, a streak of fire suddenly shot up into the sky from the alley. The pursuing soldiers simply didn't understand what had happened. They felt their feet suddenly lighten and their bodies flew up into the air. Under the impact of the explosion, the walls of the alley collapsed like flour, directly burying the soldiers behind who had hurriedly stopped their bodies. In a short moment, the group of soldiers who were at a loss were sent flying and buried. They had completely lost their ability to fight. Oh, that's why I say, being uncultured will kill people. With a chuckle, Tang Yin, who seemed to have expected this, casually threw out a sarcastic remark. Then he turned his head and looked around, whispering to himself, "Here? Well, I'm almost there. I have to hurry up." After saying this, he turned around and continued to run. Needless to say, the explosion was naturally caused by the clay pot medicine. Previously, Tang had spent a whole night burying all the clay pot medicine in the West District. Moreover, the weather was also good. The snow hadn't stopped, so it was more convenient to bury it under the snow. As for why it suddenly exploded by itself, it was because of the northern wilderness berries that Tang had discovered in his previous experiment. Admittedly, the explosion of these soybean-sized berries was very weak and couldn't hurt people at all, but it also depended on where they were placed. What they were inlaid on clay pots. What if someone stepped on them, and the slight explosion triggered the sensitive medicine? In other words, these clay pot medicine were no longer simple medicine, but trigger mines that had been set up with various ingenious methods. In this way, the northern wilderness soldiers who had entered the West District to conduct a large-scale search were undoubtedly doomed. The sound of explosions rose one after another. Fire snakes burned the sky from time to time. Thick smoke had already covered most of the West District. None of the soldiers knew what had happened. They just followed the predetermined route and conducted a thorough search of the city. But in the end, when they didn't see any enemies, the team suddenly exploded, and then they could only watch as their companions flew over their heads in an instant. Broken limbs flew everywhere, and there were heavy casualties. This was definitely not a coincidence. In just a few minutes of searching, several teams had already been hit one after another. The attitude of the soldiers changed from disbelief at first to dumbfounded shock later on, and finally, they were driven mad. Enemy, enemy. The eyes of all the northern wilderness soldiers were red, and murderous intent overflowed. They needed to see the enemy, and not like now, where they didn't even see a single hair. Their own team had already suffered heavy casualties. How frustrating. The people of the northern wilderness were strong and born with great strength. Even at the front line of the brand, they were strong men who could take on 3 or 4 people by themselves. When had they ever fought such a ridiculous battle? The strange way of fighting in front of them was undoubtedly beyond their scope of understanding. The sudden explosion. Were those explosive crystals? Obviously, it was impossible. Not to mention where the brand had gotten so many explosive crystals, even if they were hidden underground. Normal people shouldn't have exploded when they stepped on them. Their doubts continued, and so did the explosions. The consequence of going crazy was that the explosions became more frequent, and they could be heard almost every 10 seconds. It was like the evening bell of the Grim Reaper, and it made one's hair stand on end. At this time, the entire West District had completely fallen into chaos. The power of the drug was limited, but there were too many of them. Under the chain of explosions, the earth and sky were turned upside down. Not only were there casualties among the soldiers, But the fire snakes also began to gradually climb up many buildings. From time to time, some people could be seen running out in a panic, and behind them were often crumbling buildings. The fire burned the city. Thick smoke covered the entire city. This place was extremely noble in the hearts of all the people of the northern wilderness. Even the rebel army didn't dare to have the slightest intention of damaging it when they entered the city. Now, because of Tangen's escape plan, it was in a sorry state gradually. The northern wilderness soldiers were afraid, retreating, and terrified. They didn't even dare to walk now. Every time they raised their feet, they would first reach out with their weapons and carefully test the safety of their next foothold. This trembling appearance was as if they were walking on thin ice. In this way, how could the search continue? How could they fight this battle? And this was the situation that the fierce Eagle Tribe's powerhouses saw when they hurried over. Their faces were instantly charred black, and they roared loudly, "Damn it! What the hell are you doing?" After listening to the timid explanation of the few soldiers, one of the powerhouses was instantly enraged. "Nonsense! I've been on the battlefield for so many years, and I've never heard of such a situation. All of you charge. If anyone dares to take another step back, I'll kill him with one blow." Under the heavy pressure, the soldiers had no choice but to once again form a formation and rush forward. Seeing this, the powerhouse's expression eased a little. He snorted and turned to the other powerhouses and said, "Everyone, that brand bastard is running too fast. We can only lead some people and split up the search for him. Once you find his whereabouts, immediately send out a signal." Before he finished speaking, suddenly, there was a loud boom. Air billowed and snow flew everywhere. The powerhouse heard the sound and turned around in shock, only to see a black shadow coming at him. Fortunately, he reacted quickly and raised his hand to flash out an eagle claw to catch the thing. He roared, "Motherf asterisk her again." In his line of sight, the group of soldiers who had just rushed out a dozen steps had already scattered. Some flew into the air, while others crashed into the walls of the houses on both sides. A few lucky ones stood where they were, their legs trembling. They wanted to run, but they didn't dare to move an inch. When he looked down, he realized that the thing in his hand was a hairy thigh. Blood spurted out, drenching the powerhouse's head and body in an instant. After that, he subconsciously murmured, "What's going on?" Ugh. Outside the Western District, Lan Sha and Tiger finally arrived. Looking at the district that seemed to be on fire, they were speechless. Even though Lan Sha knew about Tangen's methods and was mentally prepared, he still didn't expect that the other party would use such a big move to escape. Soon, the two learned the general situation from the people who had run out of the district in a panic. Tiger was dumbfounded. After a while, he turned to look at Lan Sha, whose lens reflected the fire, and sighed. "I think I know now why you protected that brand so much. Is this the destructive power of an excellent alchemist? His own power, haha, as expected, terrifying." He laughed bitterly and shook his head, speechless. Lan Sha pursed his lips when he heard that. Looking at the spectacular scene before him, he couldn't help but feel a little regretful. It seemed that leaving him in the craftsman's office was the worst decision he could have made. "I take back what I said earlier. Judging from the current situation, the Wild Eagle Tribe might not be able to catch him," Tiger said, stroking his chin. "But we already ordered the city gates to be closed when we came. In the end, he still can't escape." Pause for Awal sighed. "I hope he doesn't die now. As long as he's still breathing, the Hidden Snake Tribe is willing to offer anything in exchange for him." Speaking of this, Tiger looked at Lan Sha and shook his head. Clearly, if that really happened, the royal family wouldn't let go of this opportunity. The chances of their tribe getting Tang in were very slim. Just then, a figure rushed over from the distance. It was Andre. He was the one who'd ordered the city gates to be closed. "Your Highness." Lan Sha turned to look and nodded. "The gates are closed?" They are closed, but..." After a pause, Andre looked at Lan Sha with a strange expression. He seemed to be sizing him up. Lan Sha frowned. "But what?" Andre took a deep breath and smiled bitterly. But the soldiers at the west gate said that they saw your highness leave the royal city on a horse not long ago. What? Chapter 686. The luxurious carriage set off again. This time, it was headed for the west gate. The two of them sat across from each other in silence. Lanshaw's expression was a bit bitter. Yes, he knew that he was an expert in disguise. The lifelike disguise he used when he first caught him had only fallen off after soaking in blood for a long time. Why didn't he think of that? Compared to Lanshaw, who knew some inside information, Tiger was completely shocked and speechless. He killed Lambit on the spot during the banquet, then left the main hall after creating chaos. Then, he headed to the west side of the city. Under the encirclement of the Mad Hawk tribesmen, he used an unknown method to create even more chaos, dragging the entire west side of the city into chaos. In the end, when everyone's vision went dark and they were still going crazy from the smoke and fire, he flicked his sleeves and casually left the Imperial City. He licked his lips and said dryly, "Mysterious alchemy methods, unfathomable strength, unexpected disguise skills, and a meticulous escape plan. So he's an all-rounder?" Everyone was played in the palm of his hand. Everyone was one step behind him, including us. We could only follow behind him helplessly. We couldn't help but admire him. F***CK. Tiger couldn't help but curse. He looked up at the sky and sighed. Previously, Z invaded the city alone and broke into the city. Then, with his own strength, he caused chaos in the city again. This must be the worst scene in the history of the Northern Wilderness tribes. Behind the lens, Lanshaw's eyes were still lowered. He didn't say anything. What could she say? Was she angry at that damn guy for betraying her trust and using her sympathy? Or was she angry at him for forcing a kiss on her, stealing her things, and then running away after wiping his lips clean? He even left her with a surging heart and her imagination running wild for a long time. Whatever. Since you want Bran back, don't blame me for not doing anything. I'd like to see how you escape this time. The wheels rolled. The luxurious carriage sped towards the west gate, shrouded in thick smoke. As Lanshaw made up his mind, Tiger sighed one last time. I think I have to take back what I just said. For such a dangerous person, it would be more reassuring to have him dead. Palace Castle, main hall gate. With such a large-scale disturbance occurring in the Imperial City, the billowing smoke was about to occupy the entire castle. Naturally, it was impossible for the Empress not to receive the news. In fact, the information she received was more complete than anyone else. Lambit accepted the apology on the surface, but he secretly said some threatening words in the Northern Wilderness language. Although his voice was soft, he didn't avoid the dozen or so people around him. It was probably because of his arrogant nature that he couldn't take this lying down and wanted to use these people to spread the news. Of course, as long as we kill Tang in afterwards, there will be no evidence. These rumors will only increase the prestige of the fierce Eagle tribe. He shook his head. He was unlucky. That Arthur seemed to understand the Northern Wilderness's language. Without a word, he slapped him against the wall and smashed him into minced meat, arrogant and despotic. He had no one to blame but himself. The Empress's expression didn't change as she coldly commented. Serene nodded lightly in agreement. She continued, "What happened next was just as the report said. Arthur attacked Lanshaw and Tiger, creating chaos to escape. At least he has some brains and some comradeship." The Empress snorted lightly. Then, she waved her hand and said, "Let's not talk about what happened next. Let's talk about the Fierce Eagle tribe. What's their reaction?" According to the latest report, the Fierce Eagle tribe didn't hold back at all. They came out in full force. At this point, Selene seemed to be a little emotional. She shook her head slightly. All the Fierce Eagle tribe's men in the Imperial City's defense forces have been gathered. Also, after Arthur escaped from the Imperial City, other than the few elites who accompanied Lambit to the banquet, the other dozen or so Fierce Eagle experts who usually guard the Imperial City all left the city. They won't rest until they kill that Arthur. Interesting. The Empress's lips curled into a mocking smile. She was clearly gloating over the fierce eagle tribe situation. Selene had been by the Empress' side for so many years. Of course, she understood what she meant. The few tribes at the top of the pyramid in the northern wilderness had many conflicts with each other. The competition was fierce. Thus, it was rare to see the other party make such a fool of themselves. Naturally, she was very happy. Pausing for a moment, he asked, "As for that Arthur, how should we deal with him?" It had to be said that Twain had caused too much of a ruckus this time, almost blowing up the entire imperial city. Thus, as the royal family of the northern wilderness, the Heavenly Wolf tribe naturally couldn't not do anything. The Empress frowned slightly. To be honest, she had a lot of opinions about Arthur, especially after seeing Lan Shah's broken lip. Originally, she had planned to use some methods to make the other party suffer. Unexpectedly, before she could do anything, the other party had caused such a huge ruckus. After thinking for a while, she said slowly, "Send out the wilderness wolf riders. Don't meet the fierce eagle tribe for the time being. Just control the surrounding areas of the imperial city." Pause for a while, she narrowed her eyes. "Just treat it as giving face to the fierce eagle tribe. If that Arthur is surrounded and killed by them, then this matter will be dropped. If he doesn't die, then they can't blame us for interfering." Yes. After talking about the important matters, Lan Shah raised his eyebrows and asked with a smile, Empress, do you think that Arthur can escape this time?" The Empress's expression was indifferent. "I don't care about that. It's best if he dies. If he escapes, that's good too. As long as he doesn't appear in front of Lan Shah, it's fine." Waving her hand, she turned around and walked towards the main hall. "That's right. Don't forget to send people to seal up Arthur's residence and laboratory. Bring out the list of materials he used during this period of time. Also, control everyone who came into contact with him during this period of time. I don't care about him, but I am very interested in the things he created. I hope it won't disappoint me." What was the meaning of plucking feathers from a wild goose, leaving teeth for an elephant, and stripping a pig alive? Without a doubt, this was it. Okay. At the West City Gate, a luxurious carriage arrived. After a while, on top of the city wall. It's true, I really didn't lie. It was too dark. At first, I didn't see clearly. I even wanted to go up and stop the patrol. But when I got closer, I really did see Your Highness riding a black horse out of the city gate. It looked exactly the same, but it was missing the thing you are wearing now. If I'm lying, let the savage god take my soul and let it be bitten by 10,000 snakes, stuttering and incoherent. This barbarian soldier's face turned red. He grabbed his messy hair and was extremely conflicted. He was about to cry. He really felt wronged. If His Highness Lan Shah wanted to leave the city, a lowly soldier like him naturally wouldn't dare to stop him. But who knew that after a short while, another Lan Shah would appear in front of him? It could be said that if he didn't still have a trace of rationality left, he really wanted to reach out and touch Lan Shah's face to see if he was wearing a mask. "Okay, I believe you." Waving his hand, Lan Shah stopped the soldier from swearing. He asked, "Other than Arthur, other than the person who impersonated me, did anyone else leave the city?" "Thank you, Your Highness. Thank you, Your Highness." "Why, yes." Hearing that Lan Shah believed him, the soldier was overjoyed. He hurriedly replied, "More than 10 lords from the Wild Eagle tribe also left the city a few minutes ago." "How many?" "More than 10. Tiger and Lan Shah looked at each other, surprised. "Yes, I didn't have time to count. The lords were too fast. They all rushed out in the blink of an eye. But there were at least 15 or 16 of them." 15 or 16. Tiger propped himself up on the city wall. Looking at the boundless night sky, he murmured, "That's all the strong fighters from the Wild Eagle tribe in the Imperial City. They really won't stop until they die." Hearing that, Lan Shah pushed up his glasses. The veins on the back of his hands were very obvious. She didn't know why, but just now, a wave of panic suddenly surged in her heart. So many strong fighters. Will anything happen to them? No, what does his death have to do with me? He had brought this upon himself. Repeating this over and over again, Lan Shah finally calmed down the panic in her heart. But at this moment suddenly hiss. "WWW, what is that?" Gasping, Tiger's upper body popped out of the wall. His eyes widened in shock. Hearing that, Lansha looked up instinctively. At the end of the dark night, above the blurry mountain range, pure black chi kept gathering. In an instant, it formed an existence like a black cloud. It was condensed and solid, emitting a terrifying aura that made everything in the world tremble. They're going to flatten the mountain range. Chapter 687. They're going to flatten the mountain. Lansha was Lansha after all. Although she had no personal experience in martial arts, her off-the-charts wisdom allowed her to hit the nail on the head after seeing the terrifying black cloud in front of her. That's right, the dozen or so wild eagle tribe experts were planning to flatten the mountain in front of them. In fact, this seemingly foolish move was purely because they had no choice. Tangan was too fast. Although they didn't stop for a moment after receiving the news and rushed out of the imperial city at once, all they could see at that time was Tang Un's blurry figure flashing into the mountain. Once he entered the mountain range with complicated terrain and under the boundless night sky, even a Void Realm warrior couldn't do anything to Tang In. In this way, they had no other choice but to gather everyone's strength and bombard the mountain range in front of them, killing Twain, who was in the middle of it. Streams of black gas kept gathering from all directions, intertwining, mixing. The terrifying black cloud grew thicker and thicker, rolling wantonly, accompanied by faint, muffled sounds of thunder. It was like real clouds in the sky, brewing the violent power of thunder, lightning, wind, and torrential rain. This black cloud, formed by pure power, was too conspicuous and gloomy. Even Lansha, Tiger, and many ordinary city guards standing on the wall more than 10 miles away could tell at a glance in the dusk. Looking at this spectacular scene in front of them, feeling the terrifying pressure that made their bodies and minds tremble, everyone was speechless and dumbfounded. Since they were like this, it was needless to say how Tang In felt. Yes, Tang In was indeed in this mountain range. No matter how fast he was, he still needed time to unleash his power. Although this mountain range couldn't be compared to some large mountain ranges that easily spanned tens of thousands of kilometers, since it was named a mountain range, it naturally occupied a large area. Even though Tang In, who was cautious by nature, didn't dare to be careless after shaking off his pursuers and continued to move forward at full speed, he was still trapped inside. Without looking back, Tang In already knew what the other party was planning to do after he felt the terrifying pressure above his head. Without the slightest hesitation or consideration, Tang In's choice was very simple, and that was to continue sprinting. This was an act of helplessness, but also the only choice. Tang In was very clear about his own strength. His fighting style, occupational habits, and so on were already destined to be unable to unleash a wide range of attacks like the otherworldly martial artists. Similarly, he could not resist the unreasonable suppression of pure strength in front of him. To be honest, with the gradual improvement of his realm, Tang In had begun to look down on the common attacking method of the battle chi warriors of the otherworld. That's right, this power was indeed very terrifying, and the scene was indeed very grand. However, behind such magnificence, it also represented waste. It meant that one had not utilized and controlled their strength to the limit. It was like a basin of water. Although it was refreshing to splash it out, if the water was compressed and concentrated through a pipe, the impact would undoubtedly be greatly increased. Of course, this was only a difference in the concept of using power. In the end, it still depended on the level of strength. For example, right now, more than 10 experts of the Fierce Eagle tribe had gathered all their strength. This was no longer a matter of one basin of water or two basins of water, but a huge flood that broke through the floodgates, a wanton ocean. It was completely unreasonable, and there was no room for resistance. Fortunately, this kind of big move that gathered so much strength was not easily released. Tang In still had a chance now. As long as he could leave this area before the attack arrived, he would be able to escape this disaster. Not long after, suddenly, beep! A sharp whistle shook the sky, and the clouds above constantly tumbled, producing a huge change. A seemingly substantial giant eagle's head poked out from the black clouds, with a sharp beak and iron tail feathers. It raised its head and cried out, struggling with all its might, as if it wanted to break free from the black clouds that gave birth to it. Rustle. At the same time, all the trees in the mountain area trembled and shook, as if an earthquake had suddenly arrived. Huff. Panting heavily, his breath turned white. Following the appearance of the giant eagle's head, Tang only felt a heavy weight on his back, as if a huge millstone was pressing down on him. His speed could not help but slow down. Mother asterisk cur. Cursing in anger, Tang only felt his cerebral cortex go numb, and the alarm in his heart kept ringing. This bird's head had only just appeared, and it was already so powerful. What would happen when it landed? Haste, Phantom! All the skills that had just been buffered were stacked together, and his speed increased once more. He ran wildly between the trembling trees and the trembling mountain rocks, and in an instant, all the obstacles around him were left behind. At this time, it was no longer important whether Tangen's tracks were exposed or not, because even if the experts of the fierce eagle tribe saw him, they would not be able to move their bodies and chase after him. Eagle head, eagle neck, eagle wings. Waves of ear-piercing screeches sounded, and the struggling giant eagle gradually broke free from the black clouds, and its outline could already be seen. Faster! Faster! F asterisk king faster! Under the heavy pressure, cold sweat rolled down his forehead like a waterfall, and his narrow eyes almost narrowed into slits. At this time, Ting-in also vaguely saw the border of the mountain range. He kept mumbling like a maniac, as if urging, or as if he was hypnotizing himself. On the wall of the royal palace, Lan Sha's body had already stiffened. She raised her trembling arms that were hanging by her side. As if replaying in slow motion, she subconsciously raised them to her chest and crossed them. Her slender fingers were clenched so tightly that red marks appeared. She was in a praying posture. Tiger was not any better. The difference was that Lan Sha was nervous for someone, while he was purely shocked by this earth-shattering power. Finally, after swallowing countless mouthfuls of saliva, Tiger cried out involuntarily, "It's here!" The veins on his neck bulged, and his voice was hoarse and distorted. It sounded a little funny, but at this time, no one cared. All the guards on top of the city wall stuck their upper bodies out, their eyes bulging as they stared straight ahead. Lan Sha's body trembled when she heard that, and her face turned pale. She screamed, "No!" At this moment, she regretted it. She regretted being filled with hatred, regretted not doing anything. The regret that she forced down spread throughout her body, chilling her to the bone. However, reality could not change according to her will. Even that long hiss was instantly drowned out as soon as it came out of her mouth. Boom. The giant eagle fell, and the mountain exploded. Boom. Black gas spread, and the mountain range was turned into ashes. Boom. Waves of air rolled, and the snow in the sky was washed away. Boom. 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 Whoosh. A strong gust of wind blew. Everyone felt their chests tighten, and they fell backward. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of falling echoed, and the top of the city wall was instantly emptied. No one knew how powerful the combined attack of more than 10 warriors who were at least in Earth stage was. But from the power that leaked out from over 10 miles away, there was such a strong gust of wind. Perhaps they could get a glimpse of it. Ignoring the intense pain coming from all over her body, Lan Sha clung onto the bricks on the wall and rushed to the bottom of the wall again. She held her glasses and looked into the distance. Her panicked eyes wandered around, as if trying to find something. But unfortunately, the mountain range in the distance was covered in dust. She could not see anything at all. "It's finally over," Tiger muttered, as if he was in a dream. He grimaced as he held his injured right arm and stood up slowly. He suddenly turned his head and screamed hoarsely, "No, it's not like this." Her long hair was messy, and her eyes were as sharp as knives. At this moment, Lan Sha was like a tigress protecting her cub. She was intimidating. Taking a step back subconsciously, Tiger raised his hands in shock. What's wrong? No, he won't die. The intimidating aura only lasted for a moment. Then, Lan Sha looked as if all her energy had been sucked out of her. Her face was pale as she sat down slowly, holding her knees. He's so strong, fast, and good. He can definitely run out of the mountain range before the explosion. He definitely can. Oh, and the people from the Wild Eagle tribe haven't returned. That means he's not dead, and they're still chasing. Not even a minute had passed since the mountain range was blown up, so it was normal that the dozen or so warriors from the Wild Eagle tribe had not returned. Hearing this, Tiger spread his hands in confusion. Lan Sha, as if he did not hear anything. He'll be fine. He'll definitely be fine. He muttered repeatedly, as if to emphasize his affirmation, but also as if to hypnotize himself. In the end, his voice dissipated in the wind and gradually disappeared. Chapter 688. Violent explosions rang out incessantly, and fierce flames soared into the sky from time to time. Billowing smoke had already enveloped the entire city. Tonight, the Imperial City was destined to be in chaos. Because the elites of the Wild Eagle tribe had left in a hurry, they did not inform the others that Tang En had already left the Imperial City, so the soldiers were still trembling in fear in the Western District. By the time the people of the Imperial City reacted and hurriedly passed on the news, the mines that Tang En had spent the night setting up had almost all been triggered, and the soldiers had suffered heavy casualties. Just as the people of the Imperial City were still huddled in their houses, trembling in fear, another earth-shattering explosion came from outside the city. Even the ground of the houses here trembled. This terrifying phenomenon, as if doomsday had arrived, frightened the people of the city out of their wits, and they screamed continuously. At this time, the people of the Imperial City could not bear to watch any longer. After all, compared to watching the Wild Eagle tribe make a fool of themselves, the safety of the Imperial City was of course more important. The iron gates of the Imperial City opened with a bang, and the Imperial Guards flooded into the various districts like a tide, sealing off all the streets and comforting the people of the northern wilderness who were fleeing everywhere. Among them, a certain area in the southern district that was not considered remote, but was not considered prosperous either. It was instantly surrounded by the Imperial Guards, and the security was tight. There was naturally a reason for such serious treatment. In fact, the reason was simple, and that was because this was the habitat of most of the Brand people in the Imperial City. Just as Tang En had understood before, the Brand people in the northern wilderness Imperial City had a very difficult time and were often bullied by the people of the northern wilderness. Moreover, even the Empress was powerless to solve this problem. After all, this was caused by hundreds and thousands of years of accumulated hatred between the two countries. It was a problem left behind by history, and it could not be resolved in a short time. Over time, the Brand people who had gradually banded together simply moved to a place to live so that they would not be beaten up when they went out. As a result, there was this rather unique area now. At the same time, in a house near the middle of the street, a plump northern wasteland woman was hiding behind the window. She stuck half of her head out and vigilantly looked at the soldiers who were gradually entering the street. She turned around and said anxiously, "They're coming in, they're coming in. Old bastard, what should we do now? They're not here for our family, are they?" Although she was from the northern wilderness, the woman spoke the Brand very fluently. Eh? Sitting at the table in the main room was the owner of the house, Matthew. He was staring at the brown wooden box on the table in a daze. When he heard the sound, he turned his head with a blank expression. The woman from the northern wilderness was furious. "You old geezer, it's fine if you're usually muddle-headed, but you're still acting like a fool at a time like this. I shouldn't have agreed to marry you back then. Otherwise, I wouldn't have suffered like this." As she cursed endlessly, she hugged the two sleepy children next to her in her arms with a frightened expression. Yes, this woman from the northern wilderness was indeed Matthew's wife. Of course, this seemed a little unbelievable. After all, one was from the Brand, and the other was from the northern wilderness. But in fact, the situation was very common in this area. The idea of loyalty to one's country was sacred, but sometimes it was also extremely unrealistic. Matthew, for example, had been in the northern wilderness for nearly 20 years. He had grown from a strong middle-aged man to an old man with a white beard. If there were no accidents, he would be reduced to a pile of bones in the northern wilderness. In this way, whether it was in terms of physical needs or spiritual comfort, he needed a partner who could carry on his ancestral line and accompany him until he grew old. This had nothing to do with loyalty. It was only about human nature. It could be despised, but it could also be understood. Of course, it would be best if he could marry a woman from his country. This way, he could directly skip the long period of pain caused by the differences in culture, living habits, and other aspects of the two sides. However, this undoubtedly did not happen. The reason why these people were only captured and not killed was, of course, because they had something that was valued by the northern wilderness. And it was precisely because of this trait that determined their composition would only be more men than women. On the other hand, there were also many poor families in the northern wilderness, even in the imperial city. Therefore, instead of only adding to the burden of the family, it was better to choose to marry a brand man who had a good job. At least this way, they would not starve to death. Or those women who had already lost their husbands in the northern wilderness would not be too picky. One wanted to marry, and the other wanted to marry, so naturally they would hit it off. Moreover, these women from the northern wilderness would not have to worry about being treated unfairly if they married a brand man like Matthew. After all, based on the size of both sides, there were very few brand men who could beat them. Hearing his wife's constant cursing, Matthew's body shrank back, and he subconsciously revealed a flattering smile. "Ha, don't worry, it shouldn't be." Before he finished speaking, suddenly there was a loud banging on the door, mixed with a reprimanding tone. "Open the door," the people inside. "Open the door immediately." "Our house, ah." Matthew was shocked, his body trembled, and he almost slipped off the chair. "Mother, who is outside?" The two children were young, so naturally, they did not understand the situation in front of them. They rubbed their sleepy eyes and asked in confusion, "Soldiers or royal guards?" Through the window, the woman from the northern wilderness was shocked when she saw the soldiers who were originally walking on the street enter the front yard. She quickly hugged the two children and yelled at Matthew, "Damn it, old man, what the F***CK did you do? Why are they looking for us?" Matthew, who had always been timid, was also stunned. His mind was blank, and he stuttered, unable to say a complete sentence. The banging on the door became more urgent. At this time, the woman from the northern wilderness gritted her teeth, picked up the two children, and rushed into the kitchen. After a while, her sleeves were rolled up, and two hairy and thick arms, each holding a shiny kitchen knife, ran out. She shouted loudly, "Old man, take the children and run through the back door. Stop them." Matthew suddenly remembered something and let go of the two children. He grabbed the brown wooden box on the table and stood up. "Don't be afraid. I have." With a loud bang, the wooden door of the house could not withstand such a violent beating, and it collapsed, revealing the figures of the royal guards outside. The house was silent at first, and then suddenly there was a shrill scream. "Ah, I'll kill you." Brandishing the kitchen knife, the woman from the northern wilderness dragged her huge body and rushed up quickly. The floor rumbled, and she had the aura of a madwoman who would kill anyone who stood in her way. Swoosh! The royal guard who entered the house first was shocked when he saw this. He subconsciously pulled out the knife at his waist and was about to swing his arm to cut down. Right at this moment, a thunderous roar resounded through the air. "Stop!" The roar resounded through the room without end. The woman from the northern wilderness stopped in her tracks, and the kitchen knife froze in midair. Then an arm reached out from behind and took it and threw it aside. Matthew patted her arm, and there was a little fear on his face, but his voice was still stable. "Don't be afraid. I'm here." After saying this, he put his hands behind his back and walked slowly toward the royal guard with the brown wooden box. It was obvious from the blue veins on the back of their hands that they were holding each other tightly. However, the woman from the northern wilderness looked at Matthew's back in a daze, and her eyes were vaguely unfamiliar. Was this still the old man who only knew how to bow and apologize? "You are Matthew?" The royal guard looked up and down and asked. He nodded. "Yes, who are you?" "We are." Without waiting for the royal guard to finish speaking, Matthew suddenly shouted angrily, "I know you are royal guards, but damn it, who gave you the right to break the door and force your way in? Robbers? Don't you know I'm the person in charge of the craftsman's area? Can you afford to offend?" F***CK. The imperial bodyguard was stunned by the storm of curses. When he came back to his senses, he was furious and raised his saber. Cut at this." He raised a brown wooden box over the top and opened it, revealing a bamboo tube about a foot long and inlaid with lenses. Matthew's old face was as red as a prawn's. He waved his hand and shouted, "Do you know what this is? This is a F***King telescope. This is what His Highness Lan Shah and the Empress want. Cut it. Why don't you cut it? If you break this thing today, your whole family will be beheaded tomorrow. Do you believe me? Do you believe me?" He cursed and threatened as if he had gone berserk. His finger was about to poke the stunned Imperial Guard's nose. "Bastard, do you think I'm easy to bully? Who the F***CK is your captain? Andre? Tell him to come and see me. Why are you still standing here? It's okay if you're muddle-headed, but now you're still standing here in a daze. Get out of here. Get out." Matthew subconsciously roared out the familiar long-winded curses of his woman. It was so smooth that it came out of his mouth. Even his old face, which was green and red, now seemed to have an imposing aura. It could be said that his domineering aura was all over the place, and it suddenly shocked everyone. The room was silent. The two children were frightened, the woman in the northern wilderness was stunned, and the royal guard was dumbfounded. They had never seen the Bran, who was usually timid, shout at them. In addition, when they heard the names of Andre, His Highness Lan Shah, and the Empress, each more frightening than the last, they couldn't help but nod, put away their knives, and leave the room. Just as the figures of the royal guards disappeared at the door, Matthew's body suddenly went limp and collapsed to the ground. Bean-sized beads of sweat rolled down, and his undulating chest was like a broken bellows as he panted violently. "Old man." The woman in the northern wilderness came back to her senses and couldn't help but scream. She quickly walked over and asked, "What's wrong with you? Where are you hurt?" "Huff, huff. You scare me to death. Quick, give me a glass of water. I can't take it anymore." Chapter 689. Let's take our eyes off the barren land of the northern wilderness. As for Tang Yin, we don't know if he's dead or alive. Well, let's leave him be. On the map of Bran's territory, there were two special areas that were marked with virtual shadows. One was the vast sea around the continent, and the other was the extreme west of the 100,000 mountains. The reason why these two areas were marked with virtual shadows was the same. It was because we didn't know where the end was, and the place where we were looking at now was the latter. Bran, the 100,000 mountains, the extreme west. At dawn, the sky was gray, like a rag that had been used for a long time. There was always a dirty color that couldn't be washed clean. Lowering his gaze, he saw that the main color was also gray. Most of it was dirty fog that covered all directions. Some of it was bare hills, rugged, withered trees without leaves, and grayish-yellow, stiff, frozen soil. Phew! She pursed her lips and breathed in. The white gas turned into a strange and uncoordinated existence. However, in just a short moment, the white gas was completely assimilated and disappeared without a trace. It had to be said that in such a lifeless environment, no one would be in a good mood. Of course, there were exceptions, such as the person who was exhaling. She was also in a bad mood, very bad, but her ability to adjust was very strong. After exhaling a few mouthfuls of turbid air, her spirit was instantly lifted, and her heroic face gradually became firm. She was Josiah. She had many identities, such as a respected noble, a mysterious magician, the head of a secret organization. But now, she only had one identity, and that was the new leader of the Gray Coat Army. Oh, it was only in name, because she hadn't really been recognized yet. However, after this morning, perhaps this identity would be deserved. Well, just maybe. Josiah slowly climbed up a slightly raised mound, paused, and raised his head to look to the east. There was some expectation in his eyes, as if he was waiting for the sun to rise, but also seemed to be waiting for someone. Not long after, a slightly old voice suddenly came from behind. "Leader Josiah, you're up so early today." Turning his head, he saw an old man in blood-stained armor with white hair and a slightly gloomy expression walking over. Upon seeing this, Josiah hurriedly walked over and extended his hand to support him. There was a hint of reproach in his tone as he said, "Old Marshal Omeng, your injuries haven't healed yet, so you shouldn't be exposed to the wind. Why did you come out at this time?" It had been more than a month since the fall of the City of Dawn. The Gray Coat Army soldiers and civilians who had escaped had been hunted down for an entire month. Only a week ago, when they were completely out of the populated area, this chase officially ended. This sudden encounter was undoubtedly a huge blow to the newly developed Gray Coat Army. Not only did they lose the City of Dawn, which was a significant stronghold, but they also suffered heavy casualties. The injuries on Omeng's body were left behind when he was trying to break out of the encirclement. It's fine." Omeng smiled lightly and waved his hand. "I've spent most of my life on the battlefield. I only know how to fight and nothing else. These are just minor injuries. I'm already used to it. Leader, don't worry." Upon hearing this, Josiah's eyes drooped slightly. He helped Omeng to the top of the mound and said, "Old Marshal, I'm not the leader yet." "Why aren't you?" Omeng glared at him. "I've been entrusted by Leader Rosa. You're the new leader of the Gray Coat Army. Who dares to oppose you?" He paused for a moment. "As for those clowns, you don't have to care about them. You shouldn't have agreed to hold the election meeting of 1,000 people. But don't worry, I've already contacted a group of generals. When the time comes, everyone will stand up and support you." The so-called election meeting of 1,000 people was naturally to choose the new leader of the Gray Coat Army. Now that the Gray Coat Army's morale was low and they were leaderless, they indeed urgently needed a leader to stand up and stabilize the army's morale. Originally, there should have been no doubt about this matter. Most people knew that Rosa had appointed Josiah as the new leader before his death. However, they could only blame the group of senior ministers for not dying. They had stayed in the Gray Coat Army for so many years. More importantly, they had enjoyed the tempting taste of power during their cooperation with the brand. As such, they were naturally unwilling to let Josiah, a junior who had only joined the Gray Coat Army for a short period of time, occupy the position of leader. It was also because of these people's obstruction that the time for Josiah to officially become the leader continued to be pushed back. In the end, Josiah proposed that the soldiers and people of the Gray Coat Army send out representatives to form a meeting of 1,000 people and voluntarily elect a new leader. Those senior ministers who had ulterior motives naturally agreed when they heard this. After all, Rosa's dying instructions were very important. If it weren't for this meeting of 1,000 people, their delaying tactics would definitely not be able to stop Josiah from becoming the new leader. But now at least they saw some hope. "Thank you, old Marshal." Josiah's expression did not change when he heard this. He only bowed and thanked him. Omeng frowned and looked at him. After a moment of silence, he asked, "Josiah, tell this old man the truth. Do you have confidence? Or do you really not want to be the leader? If you don't want to, I sigh." Omeng wanted to say that he wouldn't force himself, but when he thought about the current situation of the Gray Coat Army, he naturally couldn't say it. He could only sigh and look dejected. He shook his head. "Old Marshal, why would you think that? I am very confident." Raising his head, Josiah's eyes shone with light. "I am indeed not prepared to be the new leader of the Gray Coat Army, and I have never thought about it. However, since this is Aunt Rosa's request, I will definitely not let her down." "Good." Omeng's heart instantly calmed down when he heard this. He couldn't help but praise loudly. Just as Omeng had said earlier, he only knew how to fight wars his whole life. He had no foresight when it came to electing a new leader. However, he believed in Rose's foresight, so he only recognized Josiah. If Josiah really didn't want to be the new leader, then he would appear to be in a passive position. Who else could he choose? Those high-ranking ministers? Stop fooling around. With his foresight, he could see that if the Gray Coat Army was handed over to these inexperienced people, then there would be no hope at all. After the great joy, he couldn't help but feel puzzled. Since you were so confident and willing to be the new leader, why did you agree to hold that 1,000-men meeting? It's very simple. Josiah raised a slender finger and said, "The Gray Coat Army is in a critical situation now. Electing a new leader can't be delayed any longer. They want a chance to make a comeback, and I also want a chance to make the final decision. In this case, what's the harm in agreeing to their request?" "Oh, I knew it. With your intelligence, you shouldn't have made such a stupid move." I see, huh? I knew you were the most suitable leader. They don't have brains." Omeng suddenly understood and laughed heartily. Then he seemed to have thought of something, and his smile froze. He frowned and said, "However, they have been up to a lot of tricks recently. If we can win over some of the representatives." "Old Marshal, you must have confidence in the representatives elected by the soldiers and the people. Besides," pause for a while, Josiah narrowed his eyes. "Take this opportunity to let everyone know the true colors of some people." Without further explanation, Josiah reached out to support Omeng's arm. "It's almost time. Get ready. We will go directly to the meeting later." "Okay. Don't we have to wait for sunrise?" "No, it's already out." Omeng turned his head in surprise and looked at the gray sky in the east. He couldn't help but scratch his head in confusion. However, he didn't dwell on this question. After walking down the mound, he hesitated for a while and finally asked, "What about Tang Yin? After you become the new leader, how will you deal with Tang Yin?" Josiah stopped in his tracks. His eyes drooped slightly, and his expression was inexplicable. Omeng sighed when he saw this. "You and I both know that this matter isn't actually Tang Yin's fault, but that damn Borg. But no matter what, this matter did start because of him. More importantly, in the end, Leader Lhasa died. Everyone knows about your relationship with Tang. They won't let go of this opportunity and will definitely force you to make a choice. When that time comes, what will you do?" After a moment of silence, he said, "I will solve it. Yes, I will solve it." Chapter 690. At 8 in the morning, the sun rose from the east. Although this light could not directly change the desolation of the extreme west to the 100,000 mountains, it still projected a ray of hope and brought some warmth. On the empty hill, people continued to gather. Some were wearing armor, some were wearing plain clothes. Their attire was different, but their facial expressions were mostly similar. Their expressions were gloomy, their eyes were blank, and there was not a single trace of life in them. This was the meeting place of 1,000 people. The decorations were extremely simple. Other than a crude wooden table and a dozen wooden stools at the front, there was nothing else. Right now, the people who were gathered here were the 1,000 representatives elected by the current soldiers of the Gray Cloth Army. Although there were many people, there was no greeting, discussion, or laughter when they stood together. It was obvious that they were in low spirits. In addition, because there were no restrictions, there was also a large black mass of people gathered in the surrounding area. Everyone knew what this meeting meant to the Gray Coat Army. They all stood quietly and waited. The atmosphere was solemn and heavy. Soon, the 1,000 people spread out. Josiah, Omeng, and 7 or 8 high-ranking ministers arrived at the same time. Both sides looked at each other. Josiah looked calm, while Omeng glared angrily and cursed. A few of the high-ranking ministers looked embarrassed. After glancing at each other, they immediately looked away. The remaining few people, especially the old man in a green silk robe who was walking at the front, raised their chins and snorted in disdain. "Damn it, Vibner!" Patting the raging Omeng's arm, Joja acted as if she didn't see him and walked towards the path cleared by the crowd. She was now the new leader in name, so naturally, she should be the first to enter the venue. She turned her head and looked around, meeting gazes that were either fervent with hope or flinching with fear. She smiled and nodded with a calm expression. Obviously, just as Omeng had said, some ministers with ulterior motives had done a lot of tricks recently, causing some of the representatives to change their positions. But so what? Josiah walked to the seat of honor and touched the crude wooden chair. Her eyes were filled with determination. Aunt Rosa, since this is your wish, then no one can take this seat away from me. After they were seated, the meeting began. First was the announcement of Rosa's last words. Needless to say, Omeng naturally took the lead and walked out. He glanced at the 1,000 representatives present, then glanced at the senior ministers led by Vibner and pursed his lips. He turned around and said loudly, "Before Leader Luosa died, he only told me 2 things. One was to lead the soldiers and citizens to retreat into the depths of the 100,000 mountains to avoid being hunted down. The second was to announce Josiah as the new leader of the Gray Coat Army. Does anyone have any objections?" The last sentence was roared out. To be honest, in Omeng's heart, this 1,000-man conference was completely unnecessary and pointless. As long as Rosa's last words were announced, Josiah would naturally be elected as the new leader. That was indeed the case. As soon as Omeng's voice fell, a buzzing sound could be heard from both inside and outside the arena. Most of them were shouting the words "Chief Josiah" in excitement. Although Rosa was dead, he was the one who had led the Gray Coat Army for decades. He was a warrior who had led the Gray Coat Army from scratch. He had an unshakable position and prestige in the hearts of the Gray Coat Army people. Just as the momentum was rising, Vibner suddenly stood up and waved his hand to suppress the voices below. His white beard trembled slightly as he shouted sternly, "I don't agree." The crowd suddenly fell silent. Omeng turned around in shock and was instantly enraged. He shouted, "You dare to object to Leader Rosa's last words?" "No, I respect Leader Rosa very much. I only object to Josiah's identity." Vibner was naturally not stupid enough to object to Rosa, so he only raised his head and looked at Josiah coldly. "Bulsh asterisk T, that's not the same. Old Marshal Omeng." Josiah suddenly waved his hand to interrupt Omeng, who was about to go berserk, and said calmly, "Let him speak." He good." Vibner sneered, turned around, and said confidently, "Everyone here knows why we joined the Gray Coat Army and what kind of organization the Gray Coat Army is. That's right. We are all commoners, and we hate those nobles who oppress and harm us." Then he turned halfway and suddenly waved his hand to Josiah and shouted loudly, "I want to ask, Josiah, you are a noble and I am a commoner. So what right do you have to be the leader of the Gray Coat Army? Why are you the one sitting there today and not me?" Wow. His words stirred up 1,000 waves. A few high-ranking ministers also jumped out and shouted at the top of their lungs, "That's right. You are a noble. What right do you have to lead the Gray Coat Army? Who dares to believe you? Who dares to guarantee that you won't betray the Gray Coat Army again?" The 1,000 representatives were in an uproar. It had to be said that Vibner's use of Josiah's identity to make an issue of it was a vicious move. Before Rosa's death, he had announced that Josiah would be the new leader, and no one dared to refute this. However, Josiah's background was a huge flaw, and from this point of view, Vibner's words made some sense. Josiah was a noble who oppressed the commoners and directly led to the creation of the Gray Coat Army. In this way, who would dare to put their future in your hands? Moreover, the current morale of the Gray Coat Army was low, and they could not afford any more betrayals. Therefore, even those who usually believed in Josiah could not help but be suspicious and did not dare to make a decision easily. Damn it! How could I forget about this? Omeng's expression changed when he heard this, and he was full of regret. He then looked at Vibner, who could not hide his smug smile, and was even more annoyed. "I said this meeting couldn't be held. As soon as the meeting started, such a huge crisis appeared, and everyone could not help but look at Josiah. However, Josiah's expression was very calm, as if he did not feel this so-called crisis. His indifferent gaze swept across every corner of the venue, and his calm mood infected many people. After a while, The venue gradually quieted down. Vibner naturally did not want to see this situation, and once again pressed on. Answer me, Josiah. Why is it you, a noble, and not me, a commoner? The reason is very simple. Josiah looked calm as he spread out his hands. Because we have all betrayed ourselves. Vibner was stunned. What betrayal? Are you admitting that you will betray the Gray Coat Army? Haha, look, she admitted it. There was a commotion in the venue, and most of the representatives were shocked. However, among them, there were a few quick-witted ones who were frowning and thinking about something. At this moment, suddenly clap, clap, clap. The sound of applause came from a corner of the 1,000-person representatives. Everyone subconsciously turned their heads to look and saw a young man in military uniform clapping his hands. He looked at Josiah with undisguised admiration and admiration. This young man was called Fei Rue, and he was in the military logistics department. He was also one of Tangen's few friends in the Gray Coat Army. Gradually, a few more people joined in the applause, and the people who were clapping were like Fei Rue, full of admiration. Clap, clap, clap. The applause in the venue grew louder and louder. There were also those who could not wrap their heads around it, and they looked around in shock. They subconsciously clapped their hands in agreement and whispered questions to the people beside them. Very quickly, similar explanations spread to every corner of the venue. Josiah was a noble, and Vibner was a commoner. When Josiah said, "We have all betrayed ourselves," he meant that he had betrayed his status as a noble and had been fighting for the interests of the commoners all this time. Correspondingly, he was also mocking Vibner for betraying his original intentions. Not only did he not think for the commoners, he was like a greedy noble who would do anything to obtain benefits. A simple sentence had not only resolved his crisis, but also exposed the ugly face of his opponent sarcastically. As such, it was no wonder that Fei Rue and the rest looked at Josiah with admiration and admiration. After everyone understood, they immediately applauded like thunder. They were all sincerely convinced by Josiah. At the same time, they could not help but secretly look at the smug Vibner with disdain. Omang was even more direct. After regaining his senses, he mocked the stunned Vibner. You want to be a leader with that level of intelligence? Take a rest. Chapter 691. You want to be a leader with that level of intelligence? You should rest while you still can. It was probably due to the logic of you can insult my character, but you can't insult my intelligence. Vibner was instantly enraged, but before he could retort, Josiah spoke. Minister Vibner, I'm sorry. This is the last time I'll address you as minister. Josiah's expression instantly turned cold. He waved a few pieces of paper in his hand and read out coldly. At the beginning of February, you left Dawn City under the pretext of going out on business. In fact, you accepted an invitation from a noble merchant group as a counselor and accepted a bribe of 30,000 to help this merchant group obtain an excellent location for a shop in Dawn City. At the beginning of February, you used similar methods. The hall was completely silent. Only Josiah could be heard angrily listing Vibner's misdeeds. In just a short while, there were more than a dozen pieces of information about Vibner abusing his power and embezzling money. The time, location, amount of bribe, and so on were extremely detailed and convincing. Of course, Vibner wouldn't be convinced. He was shocked at first, then panicked. Then, he sensed the burning and resentful gazes directed at him. His face instantly turned the color of a pig's liver, and he shouted fiercely, "You're slandering me. You're framing me, slandering me." It was as if he did not hear anything. Next is Minister Salik. Similarly, this is the last time I'll address you as minister. Josiah raised his head and glanced at the few ministers who had jumped out to support Vibner. He pursed his lips and said, "At the beginning of March, in just a few minutes, the 5 high-ranking ministers, including Vibner, were all listed out by Josiah." Omen was furious. The 1,000 representatives were furious, and the tens of thousands of soldiers were furious. In contrast, Vibner and the others denied it in every way possible and even slandered him. Bullsh *T. It's all bullsh asterisk T. Everyone, don't believe her. Shameless. For the leader's position, you're actually framing us, veterans who have worked hard for the Gray Coat Army for decades. How long have you F asterisk King been here? You're clearly trying to destroy the Gray Coat Army, traitor. However, after Josiah revealed the information, Vibner and the others naturally had to put their lives on the line. Shut up. Josiah suddenly roared. Bang! The simple wooden table in front of Josiah shattered with a loud bang. He flipped through the remaining papers and glanced at the several senior ministers who had not jumped out to object. Now, their faces were somewhat pale. He pursed his lips and shifted his gaze to look sharply at Vibner and the others. Framed? All right then, I'll make you accept it wholeheartedly. He laughed coldly and said, the city of Dawn was destroyed very suddenly. I'm sure you're distressed about the various precious items you hid in your homes. But it didn't matter. There are always some things that could be brought out easily, such as gold coins. Am I right? Without waiting for Vibner and the others to respond, Josiah turned to look at Omeng and said, Old Marshal, please send some people to search their tents and carriages. I remember that these people have a lot of luggage. They couldn't bear to abandon it when they were fleeing. Haha, no problem. Omeng laughed and agreed. He pointed at the few armored officers in the field and said, just the 5 of you. Did you hear what the leader said? Take some men with you and search the place for me. Be quick. Yes. The few officers accepted the order and separated the people around them to leave. Stop. You have no right to do this. Vibner and the others panicked when they saw this and rushed down the stage to stop them. Of course, they knew what the consequences would be if they were searched. However, no matter how loudly they shouted, the few officers naturally did not listen. Soon, they disappeared behind the crowd. The actions of Vibner and the others who had lost their composure were undoubtedly foreshadowing something. The atmosphere changed instantly. The 1,000-man representatives formed a wall to block Vibner and the others. They gritted their teeth, their eyes filled with hatred. If not for the fact that the results were not out yet, and they still had a shred of rationality left, they would have beaten them up already. Seeing that they could no longer stop the search, Vibner and the others quickly returned to the front of the stage. They approached Josiah and begged in a low voice, Josiah, we were muddle-headed for a moment. On account of how we have fought for the Gray Coat Army for so many years, please spare us this time. We won't fight for the position of leader. We will definitely listen to your orders in the future. Seeing the 5 white-haired elders begging in a low voice, Josiah's eyes flickered. He seemed to be unable to bear it and slowly closed his eyes. Omeng saw this and knew that things were bad. He thought that Josiah had softened his heart and quickly walked over. Leader, you can't. Logically speaking, Omeng had known Vibner and the others for a longer time and had a deeper relationship. Logically speaking, he should have left them a way out. However, the situation was different now. Both sides had completely fallen out with each other. It was either you die or I live. A moment of soft-heartedness would only lead to greater trouble in the future. Josiah opened his eyes and waved his hand to stop Omeng. His gaze calmly swept across Vibner and the others as he slowly said, You have all been in the Gray Coat Army for decades. You have indeed worked hard and contributed greatly. Yes. Vibner and the others were overjoyed when they heard this and hurriedly nodded. Josiah pursed his lips and continued, So, I will leave your corpses intact. Thud. Vibner and the others took a few steps back and staggered to the ground, their faces ashen. Omeng couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief when he saw this. No, you can't kill us. A high-ranking minister waved his arms wildly as he howled. We have contributed greatly to the Gray Coat Army. Even Rosa can't kill us. Shut up. Josiah suddenly stood up. His calm face was flushed with extreme anger. Look at how you are now. You have only achieved a temporary victory, and you have learned the ugliest side of nobles. You have become the people you used to hate the most. Now, the Gray Coat Army is in a precarious situation and is on the verge of collapse. As high-ranking ministers, Not only are you not thinking of ways to lead everyone through this crisis, you are instead fighting for power here. You have already fallen. You have completely forgotten the oath you made when you first joined the Gray Coat Army. He took a deep breath. Aunt Rosa has an iron will. She will live up to her name, even in death. Now, you are not even worthy to mention her name. Vibner and the others opened their mouths, but they were unable to say anything. However, these feelings of guilt were instantly drowned out by the fear of death. As if he had thought of something, Vibner suddenly shouted in a stern voice, "What about Twain?" It was because he assassinated the people of the Temple of Light that the City of Dawn was destroyed. Leader Rosa also died. Paused for a while, looked at the suddenly silent Josiah, and laughed maniacally. Haha, you have a good relationship with him. How will you deal with this matter? Don't tell me you don't want to avenge Rosa. Huh? D*MN, he still mentioned it. Omeng wanted to draw his sword and chop Vibner up. You don't have to provoke me, and you don't have to try to change the topic. Tangen's actions have nothing to do with the consequences you are talking about. Josiah raised his head and looked at the 1,000 representatives who were also listening. He slowly and solemnly said, "Of course, I will avenge Aunt Rosa, and I will do it quickly. However, the target is not Tangen, but the traitorous Bosco family." He glanced at Vibner, who was about to speak, and said, "As for Tangen, I am the one who introduced him to the Gray Coat Army. I will personally take responsibility for this matter." Take responsibility for what? Are you going to hunt me down? Vibner asked aggressively. After a pause, Josiah nodded lightly. The representatives in the field were in an uproar. Everyone in the Gray Coat Army had mixed feelings about Tangen. If he hadn't turned the tide several times, the Gray Coat Army might have been destroyed long ago. And now, because of him, Leader Rosa died. Of course, the cause and effect of the latter was somewhat arbitrary. After all, the direct cause was the Bosco family's betrayal. However, no one could deny that Tangen was involved in this matter. Thinking about it this way, it could be said that their success was because of Tangen, and their failure was because of Tangen. Joja was chasing after Twain? Stop fooling around. Just as everyone was sighing with emotion, Fei Rue, who was standing below, had a strange expression on his face, and the corners of his mouth twitched involuntarily. Just as Tangen had once said, Fei Rue was a smart man through and through. While everyone's attention was on chasing after Tangen, Fei Rue's focus was on Josiah's words of personally taking responsibility for this matter. This was actually a trap. By personally taking responsibility for this matter, it meant that other than Josiah, no one in the Gray Coat Army had the right or the obligation to chase after Tangen. Then, would Josiah chase after Tangen? Of course not. At least, that was how Fei Rue saw it. Josiah's action was to take all the responsibility for this matter. Furthermore, she was the new leader of the Gray Coat Army. Once her position was stabilized, who could force her to do anything? Moreover, even if someone forced her to do so, based on what she said earlier about not directly taking responsibility for this matter, there were many things that could be done. Thinking of this, Fei Rue sighed inwardly. He looked at Vibner and the others with pity in his eyes. You deserve to die. With such low IQ, why are you trying to usurp the throne? Are you tired of living? At this moment, an angry roar came from the back of the crowd. Kill them. Kill these vermin. Hearing this, everyone looked over. They saw the few officers who had just left leading more than 100 soldiers. They were in groups of 2 as they carried heavy wooden chests over. The chests had already been opened, and inside were glittering gold coins. They were dazzling and exceptionally spectacular. This was a tempting color, but now it was evidence of filth and evil. Silence, eruption. Arms were raised high, clenched into fists, and roars like thunder rang out. Kill them! Kill them! Kill them! Chapter 692. It had to be said that Vibner and the rest were really unlucky. Did Losha not know that they had embezzled money? Of course not. The reason why Losha did not punish them was because Vibner and the rest had indeed contributed greatly to the Gray Coat Army. Therefore, if there was no sudden betrayal, Although Luo Sha was very disappointed with them, he would only take back the power in their hands and not kill them. Even the bribe money would be left for them to live peacefully in their old age. However, the situation was different now. The city of Dawn had been conquered, and the Gray Coat army had been beaten back to their previous state of wandering and fleeing. At this time, what they could not tolerate the most was the dirty deeds of their own people. They were worried that they would be betrayed again and stabbed in the back by their own people. Hence, Vibner and the rest were treated as typical examples of killing them. Kill them, kill them, kill them. The angry roars were not only from the thousands of representatives in the hall, but also from the tens of thousands of soldiers and civilians outside. It could be said that if looks could kill, Vibner and the rest would have been riddled with holes. This was the general trend, and no one could stop it. With this huge commotion, Josiah's promise to leave their corpses intact was now impossible. Of course, Josiah did not have to go back on his word. Omen waved his hand, and a few officers who could not hold back jumped out and tied up Vibner and the rest. Get lost. I'm a department head. You can't kill me. Murder. Help. After stripping away the facade of being a department head, Vibner and the rest were just ordinary old men. Furthermore, they were living like princes and were greedy for wealth. They were no longer as ruthless as they used to be. When faced with death, all they could do was roll on the ground and shout crazily. Vibner was slightly calmer. He turned to look at the other department heads who were shouting, "Kill him!" His old face flashed with hatred, and he suddenly struggled violently. He pointed at them and said, "They did the same. The bribes they received were no less than ours. Why don't you kill them? I can't accept this. I can't accept this." There was a sudden silence in the hall. The other department heads, who had been tied up, also reacted. Evil thoughts appeared in their minds as they shouted crazily. Yes, we can testify that they were also greedy. He turned his head and looked at a certain spot among the 1,000 representatives. "And you guys, how did you guarantee that you would keep your promise after receiving our money?" He said that he would definitely choose us. There was an uproar in the hall. The thousands of people in the hall avoided the gaze of the ghost in the center and hurriedly moved away from their line of sight. As for those who were magnanimous, they turned their heads and looked around with righteous indignation, wanting to find all these vermin. The several senior ministers sitting on the wooden benches stiffened when they heard this. Sensing the countless suspicious gazes directed at them, their old faces instantly turned pale. In their hearts, they wished they could tear Vibner and the others to shreds. At this moment, Josiah pressed down with his palm, controlling the representatives who were about to go berserk. He looked at Vibner and the others and said coldly, "Originally, I was planning to leave you all with an intact corpse on account of your previous contributions. I didn't expect you guys to be so despicable. Even when you're about to die, you still don't forget to frame others. You really deserve to die." He decisively waved his hand, his face ice cold. "Men, behead him on the spot." These ministers were framed? That was naturally impossible. However, Josiah becoming the new leader was an unstoppable trend. As such, it was naturally impossible to kill off all the senior officials. If he did that, the superstructure of the Gray Coat army would collapse. Furthermore, although the remaining few people were definitely related to Vibner in some way, it was enough for Josiah that they didn't jump out to support him. Keeping these senior members of the Gray Coat army alive would allow them to continue playing a role and stabilize the morale of the army. Secondly, Josiah had something on them, so they wouldn't be able to cause any trouble. In fact, they would even support her strongly. Josiah's words were undoubtedly the final verdict, and the atmosphere in the hall instantly changed. Everyone suddenly realized that they understood the sinister intentions of Vibner and the others. The remaining ministers naturally wouldn't miss such an opportunity. They immediately jumped out and pointed at Vibner and the others, reprimanding them in a righteous manner. "Yes, that's right. We were framed. Damn it, you shameless vermin. To think that we had such a close relationship. I didn't expect you guys to be such people. Kill them under such an atmosphere. No one would believe anything Vibner and the others said." Furthermore, to achieve the greatest effect of calming the crowd and boosting morale, Vibner and the others didn't hesitate. A few short minutes later, under the gaze of everyone in the hall, a few crisp sounds rang out, and the heads of Vibner and the others rolled off the stage. Good kill. They got off too easy. As a few officers grabbed the heads of Vibner and the others and waved them around, cheers rang out like rolling thunder in the sky. As the atmosphere heated up, Josiah straightened his body with a solemn expression and gestured with his hands. After the hall quieted down, he shouted, "In the past, I've never liked violence, killing, and bloodshed. I've also never thought that these were the only way to achieve a successful reform. But now I've realized that I was wrong. After we put down our weapons, no one cares about us, no one believes us, and no one is willing to listen to us quietly. Then, all right." He took a deep breath and continued, "I hereby solemnly announce that from this moment onwards, the Brand Empire is our lifelong enemy, and the Temple of Light is no longer our religion. Other than our own hands, the weapons in our hands, and the companions behind us, we believe in nothing. We believe in nothing. We believe in nothing." Thunder roared like a storm, waving their fists in unison like a dense forest, venting their anger on the world. Josiah shouted again, "Anyone can start a war. That's their freedom. But to end a war, the victor has to agree. So, from now on, before we win, before we take revenge, before we vent our anger, before we succeed in our reform, He waved his fists fiercely, and his voice pierced the sky. "We won't stop until we die. We won't stop until we die. We won't stop until we die." Waves of sound surged from all directions like a tide, and his white robe fluttered. Josiah stood in the center of the storm without taking a step back. He stood firmly with a solemn face. Vaguely, it was as if a goddess had arrived. It was so familiar. Perhaps she would be the leader who could lead the gray coat army out of this predicament. Seeing this familiar scene, Omeng thought of Rosa decades ago. Then he took a step forward, waved his arm, and roared, "Josiah!" The voices in the hall paused for a while. The few high-ranking ministers were the first to react, and they shouted at the top of their lungs, "Leader! Josiah!" Roulé echoed, "Leader! Leader! Leader! Success!" Feeling the almost tangible worship and respect in the air, Josiah touched the armrest of the wooden chair beside him, and his eyes drooped slightly. In fact, at this time, he did not feel much joy from success. From the beginning, he knew that Wildner and the others would not be able to do much. The opponent was too weak. So, he only felt relieved that he had completed Rose's task. The shouting continued for a long time until the meeting ended. As for the election of 1,000 people, there was no need to even go through the motions. After the crowd gradually dispersed, the remaining ministers came over with embarrassed expressions. From time to time, they looked at the few pieces of white paper in Josiah's hand, and there was still fear in their eyes. Needless to say, they knew that Josiah already knew about their dirty deeds. Now, they naturally came over to ask for a clear explanation and for peace of mind. But now, Josiah had no time to pay attention to them. He only glanced at them indifferently and said calmly, "Before noon today, send all the things to the logistics department." After saying that, he directly left. The so-called things were naturally the bribes that they had embezzled. He had already given them a chance. If they confiscated the money as requested, Josiah naturally wouldn't mind forgiving them once. After all, they were still useful. But if they didn't, 10 minutes later, Josiah walked out of the temporary encampment and went to the rear of the team. He lifted the curtain and entered a temporary gray tent that had been set up temporarily. "Sister Shay, Josiah, how did it go? Did it work?" There were a lot of people in the tent, and they were all familiar faces. Little Carol, David, Luke, Angus. Except for Michaud's team, almost all the members of the Gray Space team were here. This wasn't strange. David and the others were first-rate at tracking. Also, when Josiah and the others retreated into the depths of the mountains, they had taken into consideration the scattered remnants of the team and left a lot of unique markings along the way. So, after David and the others broke out of the encirclement of the Brand's regular soldiers, it naturally wasn't difficult for them to find the main force. Joshua nodded lightly. He looked at Angus and said, "Thanks to you for remembering the bribery of Vibner and the others. We have succeeded." Angus, who was standing with a cane, waved his hand and said casually, "It's nothing. Intelligence work is my specialty. My memory isn't good, so this is all I can remember. If Michaud—" He paused and stopped in time, but the atmosphere in the tent still changed. David, Luke, and the others clenched their fists, pain, anger, and disbelief flashing in their eyes. Josiah naturally knew why. In fact, after she heard about Michaud's betrayal, she was in a daze for a long time, and her heart was full of ridicule and disbelief. David and the others, who had gone through life and death with Michaud, were even more shocked. After clearing his throat, Josiah changed the topic. "I've already issued a kill order to Tang Yin. You may be implicated, but it's not a big problem. It should be resolved in a while, so you still need to hide for a while." This was something they had discussed before, and David nodded to show that he understood. "Well, help me do something at noon. Search the ministers again. If you find anyone hiding gold coins, make him disappear silently. The Grey Coat Army can't afford to raise vermin now." David's expression was wooden, and he still nodded. "Sigh." Josiah sighed secretly and hesitated for a moment. Finally, he pursed his lips and said, "1 month. After the team finds a base and settles down, I will personally lead people to kill the Bosco family and avenge Aunt Rosa." This was inevitable. Although Josiah had been recognized just now, if he wanted to truly become the leader of the Grey Coat Army, he had to avenge Rosa first. David suddenly raised his head when he heard this. Michaud had betrayed the Bosco family, and the hidden meaning of this sentence was that David and the others had to make a decision about Michaud. After a moment of silence, David looked at Luke, Harry, and the other members of the gray space beside him, and finally said slowly, "We'll go together. There's still a month left. You think about it again. Or it won't be too late to decide when Tang Yin comes back." In Josiah's current position, Michaud and Bosco were actually traitors, and they were targets that the Grey Coat Army had to take revenge on. However, she respected David's choice and decided to let David and the others deal with this matter themselves. Of course, if only Tang Yin was here. But where are you, Tang Yin? Chapter 693. Where was Tang Yin? This question did not only exist in Josiah's heart, or to be more precise, it existed in the hearts of more than one woman. Ugh. All right, it seemed a little shameless to say it like that. Yes, just a little. However, no matter how shameless it was, it still had to be said. The other women were naturally Sylvia and Lan Sha. Of course, the former only had resentment, killing intent, and hatred towards Tang Yin, and it was the kind that was deep. If she saw him in her dreams, she would not hesitate to stab him to death with her spear. If it was in reality, yes, there was no doubt that there was a wooden stake in a church where she practiced her marksmanship, with Tang Yin's portrait pasted on it, and it was already full of holes, compared to Josiah's concern and Sylvia's violence. Lan Sha's reaction was much gentler and calmer. This was normal. After all, there was no love or hate between the two of them. And the reason why Lan Sha had such feelings for Tang and was mostly because she was too simple and had never touched the field of love, but she had done something with Tang in that all other people in love had done, except for the last bottom line. There was an old saying that said it was always better for lovers to be old, especially when it came to first love. Towards Tang Yin, this wretched guy who not only stole her first kiss, but also saw her body from head to toe, Lan Sha naturally had such feelings. Of course, there's another reason why Lan Sha was so gentle and calm now. She did not know if it was because of her crow's mouth on the city wall that day, or some other reason, but the fierce Eagle Tribe's experts did not immediately return to the Imperial City after bombarding the mountains, and it was like this for a few days. This situation was undoubtedly strange, and, according to common sense, there was only one reason for this strange situation, and that was that Tang Yin was not dead, and the fierce Eagle Tribe's experts were still chasing after him. Thinking of this, Lan Sha naturally calmed down. Then, was this really the case? 5 days after the turmoil in the imperial city, in a remote corner of the western region of the northern wilderness. There was a tribe here, and the name of the tribe was very well known. Not only in the northern wilderness, but even in the brand, people often mentioned it, because it was called Charming Fox. As previously mentioned, the Charm Fox tribe was a very special existence in the northern wilderness. Although they were said to be strong, their actual combat strength was indeed very weak. In the northern wilderness, even large tribes like the Hidden Serpent and Berserk Lion tribes wouldn't easily provoke them. However, what appeared in front of us was not the real Charm Fox tribe, but a very small branch tribe. The so-called branch, as the name implied, was naturally a small individual separated from the main body. As for why they were separated, there was no need to elaborate. They were suppressed, changed environments, and simply separated. There were too many possibilities. Who knew? What needed to be said was that something big had happened in this small Charm Fox branch tribe. They were the siblings Suya and Bran from the tribe. Yesterday evening, they had brought back the corpse of a shadow leopard. Shadow leopard, a level 2 magic beast. Its speed was very fast, and it liked to sneak attack. Since it was called a magic beast, then this shadow leopard naturally had some strength. A level 2 magic beast wasn't high, but it wasn't low either. At least, it wasn't something that the weak Charm Fox tribe members could defeat. Suya and Bran had relied on each other for survival since they were young. They didn't have any great abilities and usually just set up traps to catch small beasts to survive. This method was also the source of food for the majority of the Charm Fox branch tribe members. Yesterday, Suya and her brother's luck was very bad. They didn't catch any prey after setting up more than 10 traps. When they reached the last trap, they were pleasantly surprised to find that a large wild goat had fallen into the trap. But before they could be happy that they had a week's worth of food, they found that there was an uninvited guest eating the wild goat. It was the shadow leopard. Suya and her brother naturally knew how powerful the shadow leopard was. Seeing this, they were shocked and immediately wanted to retreat. But a magic beast's appetite wasn't small. Perhaps it felt that a wild goat wasn't enough for it to eat. The vigilant shadow leopard discovered Suya and her brother. It quickly abandoned the wild goat and began to close in on them. The shadow leopard's speed was too terrifying. Even if Suya let her brother Bran run first, it would be futile. When they were in despair, a beautiful woman with bloodstains on her body suddenly rushed into the field. The shadow leopard didn't seem to have sensed the arrival of the woman and was obviously shocked. It subconsciously wanted to jump into the air and attack. Next, before Suya and her brother could cry out in alarm, the ferocious and terrifying shadow leopard was actually grabbed by the throat by the beautiful woman. With a gotcha sound, it died on the spot. This scene undoubtedly shocked Suya and her brother. But before they could recover from their shock, the beautiful woman fainted on the ground due to her heavy injuries. The smell of blood easily attracted wild beasts and magic beasts. Suya and her brother, who had just recovered from their shock, didn't care about the wild goat and turned to move the shadow leopard and the beautiful woman. Fortunately, the shadow leopard's body was relatively light. This was also the reason why it could maintain its speed. So with the strength of Suya and her brother, they walked for a while and rested for a while. With great difficulty, they were able to carry it back to the tribe. Needless to say, the shadow leopard's corpse naturally caused a stir in this small branch tribe. As for the beautiful woman, everyone had their guesses. In the end, most of them believed that she should be a member of the Charm Fox tribe. The reason was very simple. Other than the Charm Fox tribe, where else could they find such a beautiful woman in the northern wilderness? It was also because of this reason that although the people of the tribe saw the bloodstains on the beautiful woman's body and knew that she might be troublesome, they still decided to take her in and place her with Suya and her brother. Suya and her brother naturally didn't have any objections to this arrangement. After all, the other party had indeed saved their lives. But as for how to deal with the shadow leopard, the two siblings had different opinions. As a matter of fact, they started arguing early in the morning. "Sister, just agree to my request. Your matter can't be delayed any longer. Let's sell this shadow leopard, and ask someone for help. Then you won't be bullied by that bastard bear anymore. The magic beast's body was full of treasures. Whether it was in the northern wilderness or in the Bran, its value was not small. No. At first, she sternly refused. Then, Suya's tone softened. She touched the head of the Bran Emperor and said with a sad face, "A shadow leopard can't invite a master. Leo's tribe is very powerful nearby. No one wants to offend him. Then we can use this shadow leopard to ask Aunt Elsa, who married into the Black Mountain tribe, for help." I said no. Bran Emperor, this shadow leopard wasn't killed by us. It belongs to this sister. Hearing this, the Bran Emperor subconsciously turned his head and looked at the beautiful woman who occupied their only bed. He pursed his lips and said, "But we saved her. She saved us first." Suya frowned. "Bran Emperor, how many times do I have to tell you? You can't take things that don't belong to us. Otherwise, you'll suffer a great loss one day." "But sister, what about your matter? I'll find a way." "You always say that, but you're always bullied by that bastard bear Leo." Bran Emperor, bastard bear? Leopard? What nonsense is this? Tang woke up in the midst of a quarrel. He opened his eyes in a daze. Just as he was about to open his mouth to ask, a sudden burst of intense pain came from all over his body. His vision suddenly turned black, and he couldn't stop coughing and spitting out blood. Cough, cough. The quarrel suddenly stopped. "Hey, sister, he's awake." "I know. Go get a glass of water." "Oh." There was an unwilling voice. After Tang concentrated and dispersed the black clouds in front of him, he saw a beautiful woman with watery eyes appear in front of him. She asked with concern, "Your injuries are very serious. I thought it would take a few days for you to wake up. How are you feeling now?" Where is this place?" Tangen's injuries were indeed very serious. It was just a normal question, but it sounded very intermittent and weak. "Hey, your voice." Bran language? Hearing this hoarse male voice, Suya couldn't help but be surprised. She thought that he had injured his throat and didn't pay too much attention to it. But after hearing Tang on standard Bran language, she couldn't help but be stunned. Shit. Tangen's mind wasn't completely clear when he woke up, so he just asked subconsciously. But now that he heard this woman's northern wilderness language, he instantly remembered that he was in the northern wilderness tribes. But before Tangen could think of a way to salvage the situation, Suya smiled brightly and said, "This is the Charm Fox Branch tribe. My name is Suya." This sentence was said in the Bran language. Her pronunciation was very standard, and there was no ambiguous accent like the normal barbarians. Tangen couldn't help but be surprised. "You cough, you know the Bran language? What's wrong with knowing the Bran language? I can also say that the people of our Charm Fox tribe are the smartest in the northern wilderness." A nonchalant and faintly boastful Bran language was heard. Then, a young and delicate boy appeared in Tangen's sight. "Don't be so rude." Suya frowned and patted the boy's head. "I know, elder sister." The boy pouted and touched his forehead. He bowed to Tangen and said, "Hello, elder sister. My name is the Bran Emperor. Please drink some water." "Elder sister." Tangen's mouth twitched. He looked at himself and shook his head. "Bran enemy? Cough, cough. Your name is quite domineering." She corrected him unhappily. "Not enemy, but emperor. Emperor as an emperor. Bran Emperor, even more domineering." Chapter 694. A few days later, in the system space. Ding. Obtained 20 blood chi. Ding. Obtained 5,000 blood chi. Ding. Obtained 5,200 blood chi. Out of habit, Tang blocked out the system's synthesized voice. He opened the assassin panel and was stunned. He muttered to himself, "IF asterisk king leveled up again. Blood chi value 13500030000 blood chi level 8. Special effects: 8 times increase top deterrence, top defense penetration, top explosion, top internal invasion, top creation, elementary killing heart." The last time Twain's blood chi leveled up was about 2 months ago. At that time, Although he had used up 100,000 blood chi to offset the effects of the dark form skill, he still managed to level up by relying on the huge amount of blood chi gained from killing Zeisman and the others. He did not expect that in less than 2 months, his blood chi would level up again. The 40,000 blood chi he had obtained this time did not come from the Imperial City soldiers. In fact, as Tang En's strength increased, killing ordinary people did not give him much blood chi. Even the barbarian warrior who defeated the brand's regular soldiers by himself could only give him a pitiful 20 to 30 blood chi points. During the Imperial City breakout, the pot of black gunpowder killed many people, but did not count as Tang En's. The system only recognized that Tang En killed people with his own hands to obtain blood chi points, such as when he killed people with a dagger or when he personally controlled the Thunder God's roar to bombard the canyon. As for the pot of black gunpowder, although it was buried by Tang En, he was not the one who detonated it, so naturally it did not count. These huge amounts of blood chi came from the Wild Eagle Tribe's powerhouses. Wan Sha's guess was right. Those powerhouses had indeed discovered that Tang En had rushed out of the mountains at the last moment, so they did not return to the Imperial City, but continued to pursue him. However, the situation after that was no longer under their control. Tang En was hit by the aftermath of the earth-shattering explosion and was seriously injured. But at the same time, the experts of the Fierce Eagle Tribe did not have it easy either. This kind of big move that gathered everyone's strength to flatten the mountain range was naturally not something that could be easily used. In reality, their strength had fallen even more, and the pursuit after that was mostly relying on the advantage of numbers. Tang En was not afraid of this kind of advantage in numbers. It did not matter if he was injured or his strength was damaged. He mainly relied on various assassination methods to kill people. This was a difference in awareness, and it had little to do with strength. Immediately, this gap was vividly displayed in the next few days. The experts of the Fierce Eagle Tribe did not know much about Tang En's situation. They only knew that his strength was not bad, but they did not know what realm he had reached. Therefore, their initial choice was to spread out collectively. It should be said that this choice was not wrong. Tang En's speed, hiding skills, and so on were too abnormal. They could only use this method to expand their search range to make up for it. Unfortunately, their opponent was Tang En, an assassin who was good at close combat and never afraid of one-on-one duels. Thus, the counterattack began. It could be said that if someone had not sensed that something was wrong in the end and quickly shrank their formation, it was hard to say how many of the 15 or 16 Fierce Eagle Tribe experts would have been left. But even so, there were still 7 Fierce Eagle Tribe experts who died under Tang En's blade, delivering a huge amount of blood and chi that was enough to level up. Without a doubt, this was a classic counterattack that was enough to be written into the assassin's textbook. It was also Tang En's heavy return to their grand farewell ceremony from before. Of course, Tang En also knew that the most important thing now was not to counterattack. So when he saw the other party shrink back in fear, he ran at full speed without hesitation, leaving them behind. However, this was not the end. Soon after, he was surrounded by a large group of wilderness wolf cavalry. Although after a day and night of entanglement, Tang En finally succeeded in shaking off the other party, but he also used up the last bit of his strength. After that, he only knew how to run, muddle-headed running aimlessly until he accidentally saved Suya and her brother and fell to the ground exhausted. Oh, my luck is not bad. Thinking back to this escape experience, Tang En shook his head and laughed at himself. Yes, his luck was not bad, meeting the kind-hearted Suya and her brother. More importantly, because he did not have time to change his disguise during the escape, his appearance was still Lan Sha's appearance. So in the end, he actually gained the favor of this charming Fox tribe branch and was able to enter to recuperate. If an assassin wants to succeed, they always need a little bit of luck. Not far away, the old butler seemed to have heard Tang En's sigh and responded without any emotion. Tang En waved his hand to disperse the assassin panel, turned around and spread out his hands. Then I want to know which god gave me this luck. Could it be that he gave me a nap by mistake? You have to know that I'm not a good person. I believe this. You are indeed not a good person, or rather, all assassins are like this. But, closing the book, the old butler looked up and said calmly, "How do you know that there is no distinction between good and bad gods? The god of light will not favor you, but that does not mean that the devil will not." Hearing this, Tang In was startled, and then could not help but give thumbs up. "You are right, I am narrow-minded." Then he could not help but pat his head in self-mockery. "Damn, my rhythm is a bit off. How did I subconsciously put myself on the opposite side of all the gods? Perhaps this is the reason why you became a blasphemer." After casually explaining, the old butler's expression became serious and said, "Tang In, I advise you to suppress your blood energy. Do not level up again in a short period of time." "Oh, why?" Tang In was startled. "Isn't the more blood energy, the higher my strength will be?" "It is indeed so, but your system level has not caught up." The old butler explained calmly. "All power systems, in fact, have some things that must exist. For example, Do Qi is overbearing, but it will bring a burden to the meridians in the body. The mystery of magic will also bring about an impact on the spirit. As for blood energy, to put it simply, this is actually a murderous aura. It can provide you with a source of power, but it will also change your personality, causing you to be addicted to it and unable to extricate yourself. If you do not limit it, it is inevitable that you will eventually become a killing machine." Well, did you see the murderous intent in the blood energy's special effect this time? This is the murderous intent, and also a sign. Of course, this is also the path of an assassin, but I guess you won't like it. Of course, who would be willing to give up being a good human and become a machine? Tang In frowned. How should this be limited? That's hard to say. The old butler was somewhat non-committal about the first half of Tang In's evaluation, but then he said the so-called limitation is actually very simple. The human body is a small universe, and also a carrier that carries everything. As long as the physical quality is improved, you'll naturally be able to control power. Therefore, I advise you not to level up your blood energy in a short period of time, but to think more about how to level up your system level. Pause for a while. This is your advantage. You don't have to choose to temper your body or spirit like ordinary people. This is because every time the system levels up, it will greatly improve your physical quality. Of course, this is a way to treat the symptoms, not the target. Well, it's also the most commonly used method. What about the root of the problem? You won't learn it. Well, there's no harm in saying it. The old butler thought about it and said, blood energy is mainly used for killing, so if you want to dilute these negative emotions, you have to learn some positive things. Religion has a very deep research on this, and this is the Shiza mainland, so the Temple of Light meets this requirement. Well, will you become a clergyman and chant doctrines all day long? You're kidding me. If I go there, I'll either be looking for death or killing people. Why the hell would I chant doctrines? The old butler was not surprised and raised the book in his hand. Maybe you can choose to read poetry books or something. Although the effect is not as obvious as doctrines, it can still achieve a general sense of self-cultivation. Ha, what a joke. I'm a genius. How can I use such a stupid method? Tang In curled his lips in disdain and gestured with his hand. The aura of a nouveau riche was unmistakable. Come on, give me a package and instill it directly. I need 1,000 blood energy. The old butler crossed his arms and did not get up to instill Tang In. Instead, he calmly asked an irrelevant question. Have you heard of the Tao Te Ching? Isn't that obvious? The Tao that can be said is not the Tao. The name that can be named is not the name. Well, the next one is... After a pause, Tang In's eyes turned and changed the topic. There's no need to say what's next. Even a child knows this. Then, do you understand the meaning? After being stunned, Tang In quickly reacted. It was a very simple principle. This was different from the language of the northern wilderness. Even if he had instilled countless ancient books in his chest and even memorized them backwards, it was useless if he did not understand the meaning behind them. So, the old butler retracted his gaze and opened the book. He said indifferently, "Stupidity is not scary, but stupidity of a genius is often scary. Ahem. Well, I suddenly remembered that I have something to do outside. I won't see you out. Chapter 695. Leaving the system space in a sorry state, Tang Yin's face could not help but turn green and red. He looked extremely embarrassed. He grinned and thought to himself, the old butler's sharp tongue is much better than mine. Could this be the benefit of reading a lot of books? The disadvantage? Yet he always looked so calm. As expected, dogs that bite don't bark. After cursing in his heart, Tang Yin struggled to get up from the bed with his arms. He could not help but grin. After getting up, he did a few stretches. Lan Sha's beautiful face was even more distorted. Although he had rested for a few days, Tang Yin's injuries were too serious this time. Moreover, there were internal and external injuries. It was more troublesome for him to fully recover. Of course, it was only troublesome. In fact, Tang Yin's recovery speed was astonishing. Relying on his abnormal physique and intermediate-level creation, he could get out of bed and walk around in just a few days. It had to be said that this was definitely a miracle. If this injury happened to someone else, it would be hard to say whether they could survive or not. Moreover, even if they could survive, they would have to rest in bed for at least half a year. After doing some simple exercises in the room, Tang Yin pushed open the wooden door and walked out. Suya and her brother's residence was very simple. Apart from a main house and the small wooden shed next to it for food, there were no other houses. As Tang Yin was a patient, he naturally occupied the main room and the only bed for the next few days. As for Suya and her brother, they would spend the night at their neighbor's house. The people there were simple and honest, so they were not afraid that he would steal the things in the house. Of course, there was really nothing to steal. Outside the main house was a small courtyard surrounded by a fence. A boy wearing patched animal skin and sweating profusely was punching and kicking a wooden stake. He was working very hard and did not even notice that Tang Yin was behind him. Huff! Ha! Huff! After observing for a while, Tang Yin reached out and patted the boy's shoulder. Hi, Brand Emperor. With a sharp shriek, the Brand Emperor leaped 10 feet away like a rabbit that had been shot by an arrow. His face was full of horror, and he was obviously frightened. Is there a need for such a big reaction? Tang Yin rubbed his nose, speechless. You? The Brand Empress turned around. Her little face suddenly flushed red, as if she wanted to criticize something, but in the end, she held it back and obediently bowed in the northern wilderness. Good morning, Sister Shay. That's right, this so-called Sister Shay was naturally Tang Yin. Since this woman's appearance allowed him to safely stay in this tribe to recuperate, Tang Yin naturally would not change back. As for the name Josiah, it was naturally the last 2 words after Josiah. MHM, good morning. Tang Yin nodded casually. Looking at the wooden stake that had been ravaged, he asked hesitantly, Are you masochistic? Of course not. Denied loudly. The Brand Emperor was a little unhappy and argued, This is training. I want to become a strong northern wilderness warrior to protect my sister and the tribe. Oh, then why don't you use a sandbag? Well, just put the sand in a bag and hang it up. Won't it not hurt when you hit it? The Brand Emperor was stunned when he heard this. He lowered his head and thought for a while, obviously a little tempted, but in the end, he stubbornly shook his head. No, I have to use a wooden stake. I'm a man. This pain is nothing. Haha, you're ambitious. Tang Yin gave him a thumbs up and casually praised him, but in his heart, he was shaking his head. It was rumored that the people of the Charm Fox tribe were born with weak bodies. Tang Yin didn't think much of this before, but now he realized that it was true. For example, the Brand Emperor in front of him. If he was an ordinary child of the same age, he would already have a strong body. However, the Brand Emperor was still very thin and weak, like a straw, seriously malnourished. With such a body, even if he was forcefully tempered by external forces, it wouldn't have much effect. It was even very likely that there would be hidden injuries. Thinking about these things casually, Tang Yin asked, Where's your sister? Sister went to the Black Mountain tribe to find Aunt Elsa. She will only be back in the afternoon. The Brand Emperor walked back to the wooden stake. As if he remembered something, he bowed to Tang In again with a solemn face. "Thank you, Sister Shay, for giving us the shadow leopard." When Tang In woke up that day, he found that the Brand Emperor had a faint desire for the shadow leopard, so he casually gave it away. The fox girl called Suya naturally declined, but Tang In really didn't care about a mere level 2 magical beast. After several rejections, the Brand Emperor couldn't help but interject, and Suya finally accepted it. It was also because of this matter that the Brand Emperor's impression of Tang In greatly changed, and he became extremely warm and polite. "You've thanked me so many times, aren't you tired? And let's go out?" Tang In couldn't help but frown. Since he now had the ability to move, he naturally had to find a way to explore the surrounding environment first. After all, he didn't know where he was in the northern wilderness, and whether the experts of the fierce eagle tribe and the wilderness wolf riders would find him in a short time. And after they found him, where should he retreat to? So many questions. And in this way, it was naturally best to have a local to ask and lead the way. After thinking about it, Tang In turned his gaze to the Brand Emperor who had started to exercise again. His heart moved, and he said, "Brand Emperor, a patient needs to walk around to recover quickly. How about you accompany me to walk around the tribe?" The Brand Emperor was stunned when he heard this. He looked at the wooden pile in front of him and hesitated. Obviously, he didn't want to miss the best time to exercise in the morning. However, thinking of Tang In's kindness to them, he finally bit his lips and nodded. "And okay. Don't be so reluctant." After pondering for a few seconds, Tang In patted the Brand Emperor's thin shoulder. "How about this? You accompany me for a walk, and I'll teach you some martial arts. How about that?" Really? In the end, this child didn't know what modesty was, but this was also something that people liked. The Brand Emperor was overjoyed when he heard this and said excitedly, "Sister Shay, you know martial arts?" Tang In put his hands on his waist and laughed without caring about his image. Of course. Although it's not high, it's still a few stories high. Didn't you see how I killed the shadow leopard with one pinch?" Thank you, Sister Shay. I'll go change my clothes." This example undoubtedly gave the Brand Emperor a lot of confidence. He stuttered and thanked her, then quickly rushed into the house to change his clothes and take Tang In out for a walk. What a gullible child. Shaking his head and laughing, Tang In was going to stay here for a while to recover anyway. In this way, he didn't mind teaching the Brand Emperor to repay him for saving his life before. Outside the tribe. Our tribe is surrounded by mountains on 3 sides. There are a lot of prey in the mountains on the east and west sides. This is also the source of our tribe's food. As long as you don't go too deep, there generally won't be any danger. The shadow leopard last time must have been very hungry, so it ran to the periphery of the mountains. Oh, right, don't go to the mountains in the north. Why? There's no prey? No, there should be more prey there than the mountains on the east and west sides. After all, no one has hunted there before, but it's too dangerous. There are a lot of magical beasts there. Even some people in the tribe have seen the shadow of a heavenly fox in the periphery, but they don't know if it's true or not. Oh, Sister Shay, you don't know. The heavenly fox is the closest magical beast to the 5th level. It's very scary. The so-called 5th level magical beast was close to the strength of a mid-level Earth stage warrior. Moreover, almost all magical beasts had innate bloodlines, and their battle power was generally much higher than humans. So if there was really an Earth stage warrior fighting with a 5th level magical beast, the one who would die in the end would definitely be the Earth stage warrior. After spending about 2 hours, the Brand Emperor introduced the surrounding terrain of the tribe in detail, and Tang In couldn't help but secretly feel relieved. Although the Brand Emperor's knowledge was limited, he couldn't tell the exact location of the charmed fox tribe in the northern wilderness. But after comparing some information, Tang In had a rough understanding of the situation. He had run very far before he fainted, and now he was hundreds of kilometers away from the Imperial City. As long as he was careful and didn't leak any information, he wouldn't have to worry about being surrounded again. Finally, he got rid of the tracking, and the next step was to recover and return to the brand. TSK, I don't know how Josiah, little Carol, David, and Michaud are doing. They should be very worried about me. Thinking about these familiar friends in the other world, Tang and looked at the rolling mountains in the distance and couldn't help but feel warm in his heart. He couldn't help but want to fly back to the brand right now. Humans are really social animals. Well, I should find a place to settle down after I go back this time. Although being an assassin is exciting, it's not bad to live a simple life. Hee, I haven't made any progress. After 2 years of being an assassin, I'm still used to living a simple life. Chapter 696. There was a saying that people were most vulnerable when they were injured or sick. Therefore, Tang didn't know if this dull thought that suddenly appeared in his mind was because he was tired of the assassination and escape for almost 2 years. Then, at this special time, he suddenly had a great enlightenment and returned to his original state. Well, it was probably nonsense. However, no matter how complicated Tang's thoughts were, he had to eat one bite at a time. His top priority now was to recover from his injuries. Otherwise, it would be very dangerous to pass through the blockade of the northern wilderness tribes in this state. After strolling around the tribe and understanding the basic situation, Tang looked at the Brand Emperor, who looked eager but also very reserved. He couldn't help but smile and said, "My martial arts are different from ordinary people. I don't walk the path of an ordinary warrior in the northern wilderness." "Well, roughly tell me about the power system here. I'll see if I can help you." After all, the Brand Emperor was a child and didn't think too deeply. Therefore, Tang didn't hide too much when he spoke. Otherwise, if this sentence fell into the ears of Lan Sha and the others, it was very likely that they would suspect Tang's identity as a person from the northern wilderness. Without the slightest doubt, the Brand Emperor was only excited when he heard this because he heard that northern wilderness warriors had special powers and not northern wilderness warriors who only knew brute force. The difference between the two was undoubtedly still very big. Overjoyed, she hurriedly told him everything she knew. Of course, due to his limited knowledge, most of what the Brand Emperor knew was hearsay and rumors. However, for some basic things, he could clearly explain after hearing what he saw and heard. Soon, after listening to the Brand Emperor's ramblings, Tang touched his chin and fell into deep thought. It was basically the same as the rumors Tang had heard in Brand. The warriors in the northern wilderness were limited by their innate talent. They could not cultivate their battle energy or magic no matter how hard they tried. However, they also had their own unique abilities, and that was the ability to convert the power of magical beasts into their own. If they were lucky enough, they could even inherit the magical beast's innate bloodline ability or something. Oh, the northern wilderness people call this a sacrifice. Of course, this involved a religious power in the northern wilderness, the barbarian sect. This was because they were the only ones who knew the secret method of sacrificing a magical beast's power into a human's body. However, the Wildland sect was not secretive about this. As long as a person from the northern wilderness captured a magical beast and brought it to the Wildland sect, they would be able to use a secret technique after passing some tests and paying some tribute. For example, this Charmfok branch tribe also had a warrior, and that was their patriarch. However, the level of the sacrifice was relatively low. The sacrifice was only the power of a level 2 silver-clawed fox. From this point of view, it was a pity that the shadow leopard that Tang had strangled to death had died. Although they were both level 2, its power was definitely much higher than the silver-clawed fox's. However, to use the secret technique, they had to use a living body. A dead one was naturally useless. To be honest, Tang was very interested in the cultivation method of the warriors in the northern wilderness. It sounded a bit like the star-sucking technique, but what they sucked was not a human, but a magical beast. Moreover, it was not as simple as just absorbing power. After thinking for a while, Tang asked with interest, "How much of the magical beast power can you absorb with this method?" "That's hard to say. It depends on one's physique, compatibility with the magical beast, whether the casting of the technique is smooth, and one's own cultivation. The Bran Emperor counted with his fingers one by one, then finally scratched his head. I heard there are quite a lot of conditions. The highest is to absorb 60 to 70%, and the lowest is 10 to 20%. 60 to 70% is considered high. Well, it seems that this method has quite a lot of limitations. Magical beasts were generally stronger than humans, so 60 to 70% of their power was indeed quite high for humans. However, from this point, it could be seen that this cultivation method was not an absolute shortcut. With a thought, Tangan asked again, "How many magical beasts do we sacrifice? Is that okay?" "Generally not." The Bran Emperor shook his head. "The power of the magical beast is still too violent for us. Our bodies can't take it. Most people can only sacrifice once in their lives." Upon hearing this, Tang In nodded thoughtfully. After all, the body structure of a magical beast was very different from that of a human. Being able to absorb one was already considered good. In fact, it was only possible for people with strong physiques in the northern wilderness. If it was someone from the Bran, even if they knew this secret technique, it would be useless. At this time, the Bran Emperor continued with an envious expression. "However, there are also those with outstanding talent who can sacrifice 2 or 3 magical beasts. If they can adapt to it, then they'll be mighty powerhouses. For example, the #1 powerhouse in the northern wilderness, Lord Bamatu. I heard that he has sacrificed many magical beasts. He's also the only person who can cultivate the supreme martial arts technique of the northern wilderness, the savage 10,000 beast technique." "Who? Bamatu?" Tangan was stunned when he heard this familiar name. "Damn, that library keeper is so powerful." The Bamatu that Tangan knew was naturally the old man with a Mediterranean hairstyle who dozed off all day in the castle's library. He was the old man from the northern wilderness. Tangan knew that Bamatu was powerful, but because the difference in strength between them was too great, he had never felt that he was powerful. However, now that he heard the title of the #1 powerhouse in the northern wilderness, he couldn't help but feel nervous. Damn, luckily, he doesn't hate the brand too much. Otherwise, wouldn't I be in a tragedy? Sister CIA knows Lord Bamatu? The Bran Emperor heard Tangan's tone and couldn't help but exclaim, "Oh no, I've only heard of him." After coming back to his senses, Tang In casually changed the topic. "Well, we'll talk about the magical beast sacrifice later. Your body is too weak, so you probably can't withstand such a violent power." Brandy lowered his head with a gloomy expression. His little fists were clenched tightly by his sides. The people of the Charming Fox tribe were born with weak bodies. If they were forced to sacrifice, well, every year, many people died because of this reason. Patting the back of the Bran Emperor's head, Tang In said casually, "Don't worry, this is just a small problem. I'll take care of it." This wasn't bragging. Although Tang In didn't plan to teach the Bran Emperor the pure way to cultivate battle energy, he could use battle energy to build a good foundation for the Bran Emperor's body. At the very least, it would be able to withstand the sacrifice. As for the fact that the people of the northern wilderness weren't suitable for cultivating battle energy, this wasn't a problem for Tang Un. After all, he had several battle energy channels in his hands. If he piled them up, his strength would increase. Just as Tang Un brought the happy Bran Emperor back to the main entrance of the tribe, he bumped into Suya, who had just returned from outside. "Hey, sister." The Bran Emperor's eyes were sharp. When he saw Suya, he ran over happily and said excitedly, Sister Say has already agreed to teach me battle techniques. I'll soon become a powerful warrior in the northern wilderness." Suya was obviously stunned when she heard this. Then, her beautiful face flushed red. She pulled the Bran Emperor and bowed to Tang In, sobbing. Thank you. Sob. I really don't know what to say. Thank you. Why is she crying?" Tang In rubbed his nose helplessly and then tried to persuade her with some kind words. Only then did the agitated Suya calm down. At this time, the Bran Emperor thought of something and asked anxiously, "By the way, sister, Did Aunt Elsa agree to help? Yes, she agreed. She said she would help. Yay, this is great. Sister doesn't have to be bullied by that bastard bear anymore. The Bran Emperor was overjoyed when he heard this. He waved his hands and cheered loudly. Not necessarily. Tang and was very observant. Although Suya's expression was normal, there was a trace of sadness in her eyes. Obviously, she only said that to make the Bran Emperor not worry. After all, they had been resting here for a few days. Tang and roughly knew what was going on. Simply put, the patriarch of a nearby tribe had taken a fancy to Suya and wanted to marry her. However, the patriarch called Li Ao, who was the bastard bear mentioned by the Bran Emperor, didn't have a good reputation. In fact, this was the third time he wanted to marry a fox girl from the Charm Fox tribe. The first two times, it was said that he had ravaged the fox girl to death without exception. Therefore, Suya was naturally unwilling to marry him. However, Li Ao's tribe was quite powerful in this area. The Charm Fox tribe that Suya was in couldn't provide her with any help. Similarly, the tribe that Aunt Elsa was in wouldn't be willing to offend Li Ao for a fox girl. Therefore, they could only be entangled like this. Thinking about this, Suya carried a cloth bag and walked in front of Tang En. She said softly, "Here's some medicine. See if you can use it." Tang En was slightly startled. He lowered his head and looked at the medicine for internal and external injuries in the cloth bag. He couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. There was no problem with the medicine. However, it wasn't cheap in the northern wilderness. At least, it wasn't something that Suya could afford. Thinking about how Suya brought the shadow leopard's corpse to Aunt Elsa to ask for help, everything was obvious. Suya didn't give the shadow leopard to Aunt Elsa. Instead, she brought it back to exchange for medicine. "I can use it. Thank you." Since she had good intentions and had already exchanged it for medicine, Tang En naturally couldn't refuse. He smiled to express his gratitude. However, he sighed in his heart. Why else would people say that there were still many good people in this world? Chapter 697. For the next week, Tang En, who was disguised as a woman, stayed in the small tribe to recuperate with a clear conscience. He also managed to avoid the peak period of the search. His injuries recovered very quickly, even faster than Tang En had expected. However, if one thought about it carefully, it was inevitable. Firstly, it was because his body had become more and more abnormal after being ravaged. Secondly, it was because his injuries this time were different from the past. The few major injuries in the past were all related to the ghost body, evil body, and so on, resulting in some unpredictable changes. However, this time it was just a simple injury, so it was naturally easier to recover. Other than recuperating, the other thing he did was to teach the Bran Emperor. In Tang En's eyes, this was just a convenient thing to do, and he could also repay the favor of saving his life. However, Suya and her brother naturally did not think so. In this cruel northern wilderness, where the strong were respected, the importance of strength was self-evident. Although they did not know what Tang En could teach, their respect for Tang En grew day by day. Suya had also mentioned to let the Bran Emperor be Tang En's disciple, but Tang En thought that he would not be staying here for long, and that he would not be teaching anything important, so in the end, he declined. However, although he did not acknowledge this master-disciple relationship, Tang En still thought highly of the Bran Emperor. Previously, the Bran Emperor had said, "The people of the Charm Fox tribe are the smartest in the northern wilderness." Tang En had previously thought that it was just a boast, but after seeing the Bran Emperor's quick comprehension of the things he taught, as well as his extraordinary intelligence, he could not help but admit that the people of the Charm Fox tribe, other than having a beautiful face, did indeed have intelligence that far surpassed the ordinary dumb barbarians. Unfortunately, their naturally weak physique limited their talent. After all, this was the cruel and harsh northern wilderness. Here, intelligence was not as important as muscle. It was precisely because he saw the potential of the Bran Emperor that Tang En was even more attentive in teaching him. The Dochi cultivation method he chose was the Phantom Moon art that little Carol was currently cultivating. It was also Tang En's best cultivation method. In addition, Tang In also taught the brand a complete combat chi circulation channel. Of course, Tang In had made it clear that other than the brand emperor and his direct descendants, this secret technique was not to be taught to outsiders, not even his sister, Suya. The brand emperor was still young, so he naturally did not understand this explanation, especially when it involved concealing the truth from his sister, who he relied on for survival. He was somewhat unwilling. However, when Suya found out about this, she dragged the brand emperor over by his ear and made him swear an oath in the name of the savage god. In fact, Suya did not know what would happen if he agreed, but she knew that since Tang In was so serious about this matter, it must be a good thing for the brand emperor. After teaching these two things, Tang In irresponsibly became a shopkeeper. There was no other way. He could only do so much. He cultivated blood chi and was not good at do chi at all. Too much guidance would only lead to misdirection. Oh, in fact, there was one more thing, and that was to help the brand emperor enter the mountains to catch a magical beast. Compared to the path of martial arts, the brand emperor's cultivation time was still a little late. If he waited for him to make a name for himself, he would have already passed the best age to sacrifice. Of course, this matter had to wait until his injuries were healed, or at least 80% of his strength was recovered. Finally, at noon 3 days later, just after lunch. What? You want to enter the northern mountain range? Catch a magical beast? Suya covered her mouth and cried out. Tang In nodded and said with a smile, "Thank you for taking care of me during this time. My injuries have almost recovered. Well, I shouldn't stay here for long, so this is a gift to the brand emperor before I leave." The brand emperor obviously already knew about this. He lowered his head, his eyes were slightly red, and his face was full of reluctance. "You want to leave? But the northern mountain range is very dangerous." "It's okay, sister." The brand emperor wiped his eyes, looked up, and said, "Sister Shay is very powerful." After all, he had taught Tang In for more than 10 days. Sometimes he would have to personally demonstrate, so the brand emperor also had a certain understanding of Tang In's strength. Although he did not know how powerful Tang In was, he knew that the strongest chiefs of the 10 tribes combined were not as powerful as Tang In's hand. Of course, so he was not worried about Tang In's safety. After all, he could kill a shadow leopard with one hand, so there was naturally no need to worry about his safety. She was worried about the brand emperor, but in the end, she gritted her teeth and suddenly bowed to Tang In. "I'll leave everything to you." "Oh, don't worry." With 2 chuckles, Tang In reached out and helped Suya up. "Just prepare dinner and wait for us to come back." "Okay." Suya's delicate body suddenly tensed up when she was helped up, but then she quickly relaxed and nodded gently. Her beautiful face was a little red. Was he discovered? Tang In raised his eyebrows and shook his head slightly. Although he disguised himself as a woman, he was not a real woman after all. It was not strange for Suya to discover his flaws after being together for so long. After bidding farewell to Suya, Tang In took the brand emperor and ran directly out of the tribe and into the mountains in the north. As soon as he stepped into the mountain range, Twain spread his arms wide and made a stretching motion. Crackle, crackle, crackle. Crackle, crackle. Crackle, crackle. Crackle, crackle. Crackle, crackle. Crackle, crackle, crackle. Blandy, who was at the side, was dumbfounded. Well, almost 80% recovered. After comfortably stretching his muscles and bones, Tang In estimated the condition of his injuries and nodded with satisfaction. Then, he grabbed the brand emperor's shoulder and disappeared in an instant. Huff, huff, huff. When the brand emperor came back to his senses, he saw that the surrounding trees, boulders, and other things were constantly moving back in his line of sight. It was very thrilling. Shocked, he was just about to open his mouth and exclaim, but he ate a mouthful of cold wind and almost suffocated. He quickly turned his head and pursed his lips. This speed, even a shadow leopard is not so fast, right? After the shock, the brand emperor's heart was burning. It turned out that Sister Shay's strength was so strong. Then, will I be like her in the future? Of course, you are Sister Shay's disciple. Naturally, you can't embarrass your master. Of course, Tang and didn't know the Brand Emperor's secret determination at this time. He used his speed just to go deeper into the mountains faster so that he could find a stronger beast. Tang and didn't know how many times the Brand Emperor could sacrifice, but no matter what, the starting point couldn't be low. Otherwise, it would easily become useless in the future. However, the following situation wasn't good. After a while, the Brand Emperor carefully identified the beast in front of him. This is a red-haired rat, a level 2 beast. Wow, a rat is so big. Well, forget about level 2, let's look again. The voice was a little excited. This seems to be a storm liger, very close to a level 3 beast. Very close? Isn't it still level 2? Damn, what a waste of such a domineering name. Look again. Actually, this is not bad. No, in any case, this is me doing it personally. It's only level 2. I can't afford to lose this face. Sucking in a breath of cold air, his tone was excited. Hiss, this is a golden-eyed, black-horned rhinoceros, level 3 beast. Oh, finally, a level 3 beast appeared? Well, let's remember it first, then we'll look again. But this is already level 3, very good. No, this level name doesn't sound good. There was no doubt about Tang and speed. Although this mountain range wasn't small, after a few hours, he had already wandered through more than half of the mountain range, causing all the beasts in the mountain to be restless. But to be honest, the result made Tang somewhat disappointed. Although the number of beasts here wasn't small, it was reasonable for the Charmed Fox tribe to treat it as a forbidden area. But after circling around for more than half of the time, the sky was about to turn dark, and the strongest beast they found was only the purple lightning wolf king, which was infinitely close to level 4. A level 4 beast that was about the strength of a peak advanced warrior. In the eyes of the Brand Emperor, this was already the best choice, but it couldn't enter Tang's line of sight. With his current strength, he basically didn't consider beasts below Earth rank, which meant that it had to be at least level 5. As such, this purple lightning wolf king that wasn't even level 4 naturally couldn't satisfy him. Traversing through the center of the mountain range, Tang discovered that the level of the beast was getting lower and lower. He stopped in his tracks, knowing that it was futile to continue forward. Generally, high-level beasts had a strong sense of territory and didn't like to be disturbed. So the deeper he went, the more likely it was for high-level beasts to appear, and the beasts in the periphery were undoubtedly much worse. Could it be that he should use that purple lightning wolf king? Tang considered for a while, but still shook his head. It was better to go without than to have something substandard. He would come back tomorrow to search again. After making up his mind, Tang turned around and was about to embark on his return journey. But at this moment, suddenly, a deafening roar shook the sky. Oh! Chapter 698. Oh! Continuous howls shook the sky as they reverberated through the mountains. The aura was extremely shocking. This direction, this howl, this aura. Tang was slightly stunned when he heard it. He looked at the Brand Emperor and thought of something at the same time. Purple Lightning Wolf King. Realizing this, Twain raised his eyebrows. He grabbed Brandy's shoulder again and quickly turned around as if he had shrunk the ground. The Purple Lightning Wolf King would not howl for no reason. There is only one possibility for such a situation, and that was that it had met its match. If that was the case, then this matter was a little interesting. If the opponent was a human, Tang would not give up the Purple Lightning Wolf King before he found a better magical beast. He might even have to chase it away. If it was a magical beast, then Tang was even more delighted. After all, to be able to force the Purple Lightning Wolf King to howl continuously, there was no doubt that it was an existence of a higher level. The turning speed was even faster. In less than 5 minutes, Tang brought the Brand Emperor to the vicinity of the Howling Wolves. At this time, the howling of the Purple Lightning Wolf King was even more urgent. One could vaguely hear its impatience and helplessness. Tang did not deliberately hide his presence. It was futile. After all, other than him, there was still the Brand Emperor by his side. Following the howling, he directly stepped into the scene of the incident. His footsteps could not help but stop when he saw it. Not far away in the open space of the forest, a rather strange battle was taking place. Since the purple lightning wolf king could be called a king, it was obviously not alone. It still had about 100 giant wolf brothers under its command. This force was enough to dominate this mountain range. But now, the majestic purple lightning wolf king was being besieged by more than 100 of its brothers. It was in a very sorry state. Was it rebelling? This was Tangen's first impression when he saw this scene. However, he soon realized that the situation was not so simple. The eyes of the hundreds of giant wolves were all blood red, and they looked crazy. It was obvious that they were not in a normal state. Furthermore, the purple lightning wolf king's strength was not weak. Although there were many underlings rebelling, they should not be able to do anything to it. However, the scars on its body were increasing. It didn't look like they were caused by the claws of its underlings. Instead, they looked like they were added on out of thin air. This environment, Tang withdrew his gaze from the wolf pack in front of him and looked around. He couldn't help but frown slightly. Due to his recent refinement, Tang had a vague understanding of space. In his eyes, the surrounding environment seemed to be a little different. It was like a flower in the mirror or the moon in the water, separated by a thin layer of gauze. It was very awkward to look at. Illusion? Tangen's eyes flashed, and he looked a little interested. Then, he pulled the Brand Emperor and took a few steps forward, directly walking into the open space in the forest. Whoosh! As if passing through a thin layer of water curtain, the scene before Tang's eyes suddenly changed. It was no longer a lush forest, but a large ice cave with sharp icicles hanging upside down, and it was extremely cold. The wolf pack in front of him was still fighting. What was different was that on the right side of the battlefield, there was a pure white fox without a single strand of mixed fur. At this time, it was raising one of its claws and looking for an opportunity to gently drop it. Then, a few sharp icicles suddenly fell from the top of the ice cave, directly piercing the purple lightning wolf king's head. Awoo! With a miserable howl, the purple lightning wolf king dodged the icicles that were about to hit its head. Although it escaped, there was a long cut on its neck, and blood kept flowing. Except for the icicle that was hit, the other icicles turned into shadows after falling to the ground, as if they never existed. There are real and illusory, and it's hard to distinguish between the real and the fake. As expected of a fox, it's quite smart. Just as Tang uncurled his lips and secretly praised it, the Brand Emperor beside him seemed to have thought of something. He pointed at the fox and cried out, "Heavenly Fox! This is a heavenly fox. Heavens, there really is such a thing. Heavenly Fox, the closest magical beast to level 5. It had a cunning personality and was extremely good at creating illusions." Tang had heard of this magical beast when the Brand Emperor introduced the surrounding terrain. The people in the tribe had also seen traces of it. However, Heavenly Fox was an extremely rare magical beast, so the Brand Emperor did not know if the rumors were true or false. He did not expect to see it with his own eyes. However, after the origin of this magical beast was revealed, the Brand Emperor's face instantly turned pale. He was from the Charm Fox tribe, and the tribe's totem was a fox, but this did not mean that the other party would appreciate it and not kill him. In fact, according to the rumors, heavenly foxes had never had a good temper. Just as the Brand Emperor cried out, the heavenly fox suddenly turned its head and looked over. Its intelligent eyes seemed to contain human emotions, a little surprise, but more anger, as if it was very dissatisfied with Tang and the rest for interrupting its battle. This is not a heavenly fox. It is a phantom ice fiend fox. Staring at the 3 dark blue stripes on the heavenly fox's forehead, the Brand Emperor's expression changed drastically, and his hoarse voice was filled with despair. Tang asked in surprise, "Phantom ice fiend fox? What is that?" Sister CIA run. The phantom ice fiend fox is a mutated heavenly fox. It is stronger and has a more cruel personality. Take advantage of the fact that it does not have time to care about us. Run, run. After recovering from the shock, the Brand Emperor hurriedly turned around and pulled Tangen's arm, urging him to run. He looked very anxious. Tang In, on the other hand, was very calm. He looked at the phantom ice heavenly fox with interest and asked casually, "Is it very powerful? What level is it?" "What level? What level? Let's run." The Brand Emperor was so anxious that he was about to cry. Although he knew that Tang In was very powerful, he still felt that the phantom ice fiend fox's power was more terrifying in comparison. However, seeing that Tang In had no intention of leaving, he could only reply with a sad face, "This is a growth-type magical beast. I don't know what level it is now, but it will definitely exceed level 5 in the future." Exceed level 5? Growth-type magical beast? Tang In was not shocked when he heard this. Instead, he was happy. He raised his head and laughed loudly. Haha, I finally found it. Tang In really wanted to find a better sacrifice target for the Brand Emperor, but his weak body was indeed a problem. Therefore, he did not need to think about an adult high-level magical beast. He definitely would not be able to absorb it. Tang In's original plan was to find a level 5 magical beast cub, which had great potential and did not have to worry about the danger of not being able to absorb it. He did not expect that a better choice would appear now. The Phantom Ice Fiend Fox was a growth-type magical beast with great potential. It had to be said that his luck was absolutely off the charts. The Brand Emperor did not know about Tang In's bold thoughts and was still anxiously urging him to escape. However, before he could take a step, more than a dozen ice prisms near the top of the ice cave were all aimed at him. Illusion. It's all an illusion. This is not all an illusion. Tang In grabbed the muttering Brand Emperor's shoulder and moved a few steps to the side like a ghost. At this moment, whoosh, 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 more than a dozen ice prisms rapidly shot over. Most of them turned into illusions, but 2 of them deeply embedded themselves in the place where they had been standing. Interesting. Tang In was also a little surprised by the Phantom Ice Fiend Fox's attack method. In fact, in his perception just now, these dozen ice prisms were indeed illusions, but the faint sense of danger still allowed him to avoid them in time. Sure enough, after landing on the ground, 2 of the ice prisms did cause fatal damage. Illusion hid reality, reality hid emptiness. Tang In had never seen this kind of attack method before. However, it was undeniable that relying on this unpredictable method, the Phantom Ice Fiend Fox did indeed have the terrifying power to look down on all magical beasts. For example, this Purple Lightning Wolf King was a magical beast closest to the 4th level. It had a fierce reputation and its strength was not weak. However, after falling into the Phantom Ice Fiend Fox's illusion, it could only passively take a beating without any ability to resist. It's gone. Sister CIA, it's gone. The Brand Emperor, who was still in shock, turned around and found that the Phantom Ice Fiend Fox, which had been crouching there, had disappeared. He looked around, but there was no trace of it. He was instantly shocked. Of course, this was not a good thing. It could only be because Tang In's action of not retreating had completely angered the Phantom Ice Fiend Fox. Yes, I know. Tang In casually agreed and turned around. He seemed to be carefully protecting the Brand Emperor behind him and vigilantly observed the surroundings. The Brand Emperor's small mouth was tightly pursed. His eyes darted around, and his expression was extremely nervous. Although he did not think that staying here was the right decision, since Tang In had already decided, he could only follow and try not to cause trouble. However, just as he was looking around, he inadvertently glanced at Tang In's eyes. He could not help but be stunned. The almond-shaped pupils were like a cat's eyes. In the blink of an eye, the gaze was indifferent and calm, like a piece of 1,000-year-old ice. Were these still human eyes? Before the Brand Emperor could react to this discovery, his vision suddenly blurred. He saw a white claw with a dark blue glow emerge from the void and silently grab the back of Tang In's head. It happened so suddenly that the Brand Emperor's eyes were wide open. He did not have time to warn him. However, in this moment of despair, Tang In did not even turn his head. His arm turned 90 degrees as if it had been fractured and grabbed at the void behind the claw. Chi! There was a strange sound like a soldering iron being dipped into water. The area below Tang Un's wrist instantly disappeared from sight. It was not broken, but as if it had been dipped into another parallel space. He suddenly pulled back. Squeak! The pure white phantom ice fiend fox was grabbed by the throat. It struggled in the air and scratched wildly with its 4 claws. Ah, be careful. Huh? The Brand Emperor's warning came late. He covered one of his eyes and stared blankly at the captured phantom ice fiend fox. He was completely stunned. It can't fight in close combat. Its defense is weak. However, it can create illusions and deal some damage. Most importantly, it has spatial abilities. Not bad, not bad. Looking at the phantom ice fiend fox in his hand, Tang In nodded in satisfaction. For the phantom ice fiend fox to have such a terrifying reputation, its abilities were naturally not weak. Originally, it should not have been captured so easily by Tang In. Unfortunately, its illusions were used to trap the purple lightning wolf king, so it could not do anything else. Moreover, it had an extremely violent personality. When it saw that Tang In and the other person did not retreat, it immediately decided to attack them personally. It could be said that if the phantom ice fiend fox used its spatial abilities to hide and ambush another target, it would definitely achieve the desired effect. However, it had encountered Tang In, who already had a vague understanding of space. Coupled with his peeping ability that was known to see through illusions, it was naturally at a disadvantage. Chapter 699. Dong! With a light flick of his finger, a crisp sound rang out, and the infamous illusory ice fiend fox was knocked unconscious. Whoosh! Another soft sound similar to that of water splashing could be heard. Following the illusory ice fiend fox's unconscious state, the perfect ice cave illusion instantly collapsed, and the lush forest once again appeared in sight. Looking at the magical scene in front of him, Tang In couldn't help but inwardly sigh in admiration. He then looked at the unconscious fox in his hand and couldn't help but shake his head. The creator was just that mysterious. The illusory ice fiend fox had the ability to play with people in the palm of its hand and also had an unfathomable talent in space. However, its defense was so weak that it couldn't even withstand a blow from an ordinary person. And from a certain perspective, wasn't it the same for him? On one hand, it had outstanding speed, explosive power, and various assassination techniques, etc. However, its frontal defense had always been a big problem, which was why it had been forced to cover its head and flee pathetically. Ooh. It let out a low howl without any imposing manner. Once it came into contact with the illusion, the purple lightning wolf king naturally broke free. With a slap, it sent its followers, who were still foolishly surrounding it, crouching low. Its blood-red wolf eyes looked at Tang In and the illusory ice fiend fox in his hand. Tang In raised his head and looked at it, frowning slightly. Most high-level magical beasts had some intelligence and knew what to provoke and what not to provoke. This time, the purple lightning wolf king didn't even have to howl. It looked at the illusory ice fiend fox again, unwilling to give up, and slowly retreated from the empty space in the forest with its followers. Now that Tang In already had the illusory ice fiend fox, he naturally didn't care about the purple lightning wolf king, so he let it disappear from his sight. He grabbed the illusory ice fiend fox's nape and turned it around. Right, how did you raise this thing? Although the illusory ice fiend fox hadn't fully matured, it was definitely not something that the current Brand Emperor could sacrifice. Therefore, raising it in captivity was a big problem. Oh. The Brand Emperor seemed to have woken up from a dream. Looking at the ice fiend fox in Tang In's hand, he swallowed with difficulty and said hesitantly, Normally, we keep it in a metal cage. If it's stronger, we put some bewitching herbs in it to make it fall asleep. But this illusory ice fiend fox... He paused and scratched his head in distress. Metal cage? Bewitching grass? What's the use of that? The ice fiend fox was bewitching ice fiend fox was fox's bewitching. Of course bewitching. Bewitching, bewitching, bewitching fox. Bewitching. But being ice too. Bewitching ice. This was a problem that Tang In had neglected earlier. He was inexperienced. The Brand Emperor didn't expect them to be able to catch the illusory ice fiend fox, so he wasn't prepared. Furthermore, even if they could trap the illusory ice fiend fox, the Brand Emperor wouldn't be able to get the materials to do it. They could catch it, but they couldn't raise it in captivity. It had to be said that this was a big mistake. Tang In and the Brand Emperor looked at each other, speechless. I got it. After a while, Tang In raised his eyebrows and thought of a stupid idea. He tossed the illusory ice fiend fox to the Brand Emperor. If we can't do it with words, then let's do it with force. Every once in a while, hit the beast's head with a wooden stick. There shouldn't be any problems. Bulan hastily took the phantom ice fiend fox. His eyes widened in shock as he imagined himself raising his wooden club and smashing on the head. His voice trembled as he said, But how long? How long? It had to be said that this was also a problem. With the Brand Emperor's current cultivation speed, although he was talented, without a few years of training, his body wouldn't be able to withstand the sacrifice. But after a few years, with the illusory ice fiend fox's weak defense, it would probably be beaten to death. Don't worry, it won't take long. Tang In already had a plan for this. He waved his hand and said, After we go back, I'll write down an address for you. You and your sister Su Yu will immediately go to the Imperial City and find a brand called Matthew. Then, ask him to take you to see Lan Sha. She is yes, a good friend. She will help you solve this problem. That's right. Letting Su Yu and her brother take the illusory ice fiend fox to Lan Sha was Tang In's plan. To be honest, this was the only way to solve this problem. This wasn't just about the sacrifice. It was also about some dirty things that couldn't be brought to the table. Being able to catch the illusory ice fiend fox was indeed out of Tang In's expectations. Although he had good people like Su Yu and her brother, Tang In was never afraid to use the most unfathomable thoughts to guess people's hearts. The benefits of the illusory ice fiend fox were too great. Everyone knew that as long as the sacrifice was successful, they would be able to reach the heavens in one step. If this news leaked out, not to mention the other tribes, even the Charm Fox tribe wouldn't let Su Yu and her brother go. And Tang In was destined to leave the northern wilderness as soon as possible. Not only would he not be of any help if he stayed here, he might even attract stronger enemies. So in the northern wilderness, the only person Tang In could think of who could control the situation was Lan Sha. And in Tang In's opinion, even if Lan Sha didn't care about their friendship, he wouldn't mistreat Su Yu and her brother for the sake of the telescope. Yes, I'll remember. The Brand King nodded heavily. After all, he was still young and didn't realize that Lan Sha was the Royal Highness of the Northern Wilderness. Plus, after knowing that the problem was solved, he held the illusory ice fiend fox in his arms and was only foolishly happy. All he could think about was that he had sacrificed a magical beast, that he was going to become a warrior. That feeling was like sitting on clouds, like a dream. After that, Tang In used tree branches to weave a simple bamboo basket and put the illusory ice fiend fox in it. He still had the Brand King carry it on his back so that when they returned to the tribe, they wouldn't be noticed by others. After all, it was a big deal. Tang In never minded spending more effort on the details because it could often save him a lot of trouble. Tang In didn't say much about the evil in people's hearts. After all, the Brand King was still young, so he could leave these things to Su Yu. After solving these small problems, Tang In once again brought the Brand King back quickly. It was already evening and dusk was approaching. It was the best time for many nocturnal magical beasts to hunt. However, after Tang In slightly released his murderous aura, they rushed out of the mountain range without any obstructions. When they reached the outskirts of the mountain range, Tang and raised his head and looked at the bonfire in the distance. It was unusually quiet in the charming fox tribe, and he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Half a month of peaceful life was over. It was time to leave. It was with these feelings that Tang approached the main gate of the tribe. Then, the melancholy and good mood disappeared without a trace. Brand King, where did you go? Do you know that your sister was snatched away by Leo? What? Through the words of the tribe's sentries, Tang roughly understood the whole story. In the afternoon, Tang and the rest were searching for magical beasts in the mountains. Leo, who had been pestering them for a long time and had lost his patience, suddenly led his soldiers to surround the charmed Fox Branch tribe. Without saying a word, he barged in and kidnapped Suya. The charming Fox tribe was naturally very angry about this. However, with their weak fighting power, they could only be angry. After Leo ignored the complicated network of relationships they had through marriage, the charming Fox tribe could only do nothing about it. He shouted in despair, Why didn't you stop it? Why, sorry, Brand King, you didn't have a choice. Shaking his head, the sentries looked at Tang with shame. You are Miss Xia, right? When Suya was taken away from the tribe, she asked us to pass a message to you. Please take care of the Brand King. No need. Tang pressed the shoulders of the Brand King, who had lost control of his emotions. He narrowed his eyes and calmly asked, Where's the Leo tribe? What do you mean by no need? The sentries looked at the calm Tang and suddenly shuddered. They subconsciously pointed to the southeast direction. They're about 30 miles. As soon as he finished speaking, the sentries looked at the empty space in front of them. They turned around and didn't see any trace of Leo. Gulp. The sentries swallowed their saliva. For some reason, he suddenly felt that Leo seemed to have offended someone he shouldn't have. The consequences might be very serious. Chapter 700. Generally speaking, the more backward a place was, the more they paid attention to traditions. This was because they didn't know much and didn't have much knowledge. Secondly, they knew that their overall strength couldn't compare to others, so they decided to work on ancient history. This was the situation in the northern wilderness. On one hand, the people here were rough and straightforward and hated the red tape the most. On the other hand, they didn't dare to overstep their boundaries when it came to ancient rituals, such as sacrifices and weddings at the entrance of the tribe. We're so *king unlucky. The patriarch has snatched a beauty, and the brothers are drinking the wedding wine. Only we have to stand guard here in the cold wind. *ck. Isn't that so? Another guard shook his head gloomily and agreed with him. He then licked his lips, and his expression was both envious and a bit perverted. Did you see that fox girl in the afternoon? She was so damn beautiful, especially that white and tender skin. You could pinch her. TSK, if only I could marry a fox girl. Us? Forget it. Unless we steal, otherwise, with our status, those cowards won't marry their daughters to us. Cowards who only know how to hide behind women. Under the chilly wind, the two tribal guards were hiding in the lee of the mud wall, chatting with each other. Their words were filled with envy, jealousy, and disdain. In the northern wilderness, no matter how big or small the tribe was, there weren't many that looked up to the Charm Fox tribe. This had nothing to do with strength or influence. The main reason was that the Charm Fox tribe's survival method was despised by many. However, on the other hand, fox girls were famous for their beauty. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were the ideal wives for most people in the northern wilderness. Thus, the Charm Fox tribe gave people two impressions. The first was that they mocked the weak men of the tribe. The second was that they desperately wanted to obtain the beautiful women of the tribe. This was the current situation of the Charm Fox tribe. Someone's coming. Just as they were talking, a guard inadvertently raised his head and said in shock, Did the tribe leader invite people from other tribes to participate? Nonsense. This is daylight robbery. How could he invite other people? It looks like a woman? Under the dusk light, there was indeed a person dressed like a woman slowly walking over. Although they couldn't see clearly, they couldn't be wrong. Stop. You. After all, these two guards had the duty of being sentries. When they saw the situation, they naturally rushed out with their weapons. However, after seeing the delicate face of the woman who came, their words suddenly stopped. Their eyes were full of greed, and their faces were frivolous and lewd. Yo, where did this beautiful little girl come from? What are you doing here? The young woman's expression was calm. She stroked her long hair and said with a charming smile, "Two big brothers, you've worked hard. I'm from Suya's maiden family. Maiden family, do you understand? She is the relative of Suya, who is married to your clan leader. She is here to attend the wedding banquet." It hasn't started yet, right? No, of course not. When the two guards saw this woman's charming smile, they felt as if their bones had become lighter. They subconsciously scrambled to answer. Hee, that's good. The young woman covered her mouth and chuckled. She looked around and asked casually, "Are the two big brothers in charge of guarding this place? There are too few people here." "Ha, it's fine." Everyone went inside to drink. "Who dares to provoke our tribe at this time?" one of the guards said casually. Then, he decisively stretched out his thick, hairy arm and was about to touch the woman's arm. In his heart, he only thought that this woman was beautiful, but her brain was obviously not good. "You want to see our lecherous clan leader. How can you go back? Why don't you let me take advantage of you first, Pa?" Accurately grabbing her wrist, the young woman's expression changed instantly. Her charming smile was gone. There was only coldness as cold as ice. She curled her lips and said coarsely, "Damn, why didn't you say so earlier? You're wasting my time here." As soon as she finished speaking, she took a step forward and walked between the two guards. She raised her hands and accurately brushed the guards' necks. "Gotcha!" The crisp sound of bones breaking was instantly heard. How did the charming voice become a man's vulgar words? The two guards' faces were full of doubt and confusion. They didn't say anything and fell to the ground with their eyes closed. Needless to say, this young woman was naturally Tang In. After rushing here and putting down the brand, Tang In was too lazy to investigate this tribe. He directly killed his way in from the main gate. Fortunately, because Leo was holding a wedding, only 2 people came out to stand guard, so he didn't have to force his way in and waste time. He didn't care about the 2 dead guards on the ground. In fact, from the moment Tang knew the news, the fate of the tribe's destruction had been determined. Stepping through the main entrance, Tang listened to the faint bustling noises coming from inside. He roughly observed the terrain of the lower city and narrowed his long and narrow eyes. "It doesn't seem difficult." His muttering voice was still floating in the cold wind, but his figure had already disappeared from where he was, hidden in the boundless twilight. In the center of the tribe, in the hall of the stone house, it was a boiling cauldron of voices, and the fragrance of wine filled the air. About 100 strong men from the northern wilderness crowded here. They didn't need tables or stools. They all held large bowls in their hands or directly carried wine jugs. The atmosphere was very lively. However, the most lively place was the innermost part of the hall. A burly man with a majestic body and long black chest hair, exposed from the animal skin, was surrounded by dozens of people toasting him. From time to time, he raised his head and laughed, extremely excited. The atmosphere of the entire hall was very good, except for the right corner. It was very quiet here. A beautiful woman dressed in festive red with her hands tied behind her back sat quietly at the table where only she was alone. She lowered her head and looked at the stacks of meat in front of her. She looked absent-minded and pink tears fell. At this time, he should have brought the Bran Emperor back to the tribe. "Supreme Wilderness God, please let him take the Bran Emperor away from here. No matter where he goes, I can be at ease. I beg you." Suya's eyes drooped slightly. Her lips murmured as she prayed. "Haha, it's getting late. Let me toast Suya, and then we'll find a place to drink." An equally burly man with a drunken face carried the wine jug to the corner and said vaguely. The burly man, Leo, who was sitting at the head of the table, nodded slightly in agreement. This was the custom of the northern wilderness. The relatives of the groom would toast the married woman, and then the lively wedding banquet would come to an end. The man toasting was Leo's younger brother. He staggered to the table and looked at the beautiful and charming Suya. A trace of greed and envy flashed in his eyes, but he knew that this was his brother's woman, and he absolutely could not touch her. He casually took the ceramic bowl on the table and poured some wine into it. He smiled at the resentful Suya and said, "Haha, come, drink. After drinking, you'll be my brother's woman." He paused and looked at Suya's hands that were tied to prevent her from committing suicide. He could not help but pat his own head. "Haha, look at me." He lifted the bowl and brought it to Suya's mouth. "Now it's done. Drink." Unexpectedly, Suya suddenly shook her head. Bang! The bowl fell to the ground and broke into pieces. The hall suddenly became quiet. Leo narrowed his eyes, and his face was somewhat ugly. This was not a good sign. Leo's younger brother also drank too much, and his hands and feet were unstable. That was why Suya shook his head and knocked the bowl. Seeing this, his bell-like eyes suddenly glared, and he was about to explode in anger. However, he immediately calmed down and took another ceramic bowl. He shook his head and smiled. "I drank too much. It's my fault. I can't even hold the bowl properly. Then I'll toast you again. Where's the wine?" He shook the wine jar in his hand, but only a few drops of wine slowly fell. He frowned and turned to the door of the hall and shouted, "Mother of Asterisk-her, bring me a jar of wine." Before he finished speaking, suddenly, with a loud bang, the half-closed wooden door of the hall instantly exploded. A figure directly rolled in, and along the way, knocked down a few drunkards who could not dodge in time. The unforeseen event happened too suddenly. Everyone in the hall first looked at the servant who was knocked in, and then subconsciously turned to look at the door. They saw a beautiful woman carrying a wine jar in one hand and a blood-stained iron chain in the other calmly walk into the hall. Looking around, Tangen raised the wine jar and tasted it. "Puffed. This is called wine? It's so King disgusting. Who asked for wine just now?" The hall was silent. More than 100 tribe men stared blankly, and some who had too much to drink subconsciously looked to the right corner. Tang and glanced at Leo's younger brother, and the corner of his mouth rose. "Ha for you." With a wave of his hand, the wine jar whistled through the air for more than 10 feet in an instant, and accurately hit the target's head. Bang! The wine jar shattered, and the wine mixed with blood instantly splashed. Leo's younger brother was hit hard, and his body leaned back, knocking over the table of good dishes behind him. Then he fell silent and did not move. "What?" The hall was suddenly in a mess. "Who are you?" CIA? F***CK. "Kill him. How did you get in?" Someone come. Where the F***CK did all these people go? In the chaos, the tribe men who were closest to the door rushed forward, either barehanded or waving wine jars, and instantly surrounded him. But at this moment, swish, a black shadow flashed, and a thick iron chain was swung horizontally with a sharp sound of breaking through the air. Bang! 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 The violent collision was accompanied by the sound of bones breaking, and the dozen or so burly men who had rushed up first were sent flying into the air above the hall. There was a terrifying wound on their chests that could almost cut their waists in half, and it was obvious that they wouldn't be able to survive. Drunk, and seeing the blood, the surrounding tribe men became even crazier. Their faces instantly became extremely ferocious, and they roared as they rushed forward. Tangen's expression did not change. He did not retreat, but moved forward. He brazenly took a few steps forward and rushed into the crowd. The long chain was like a spirit snake that came out of the cave, and with a soul-stirring sound, it swung horizontally and horizontally. Touching it would cause injury, and touching it would cause death. In just a few breaths, dozens of tribe men were simply smashed to the ground. Blood wantonly splashed everywhere, and the sound of miserable screams was endless. It had to be said that to deal with this kind of siege, the advantage of a long weapon was greater. Of course, the most important thing was the crushing strength. Seeing that there were not many people who could stand around, Tang and moved his wrist. With a whoosh, the chain that was swinging nimbly in the air instantly turned around and obediently wrapped around his right arm. Bang, bang, bang. The heads of the people in front of him were directly smashed open. Then he swung his arm back, and the chain flew out, smashing a big man who fled to the door to the ground. Clap, clap, clap. Clapping his hands as if he was dusting off, Tang and turned his head sideways and looked around. The hall that hosted the wedding banquet was now even more festive. What entered his eyes was a sea of red, as if it was a land of azure blood. Who are you? The only one who was still standing in the hall was Leo, and he was still quite calm. Of course, the source of this little calmness should be Suya, who was being held hostage by him. Just now, Suya called out Tang An's name in shock. This naturally became a life-saving straw in Leo's eyes. Tang An did not pay attention to the question. He walked a few steps to the right and stepped on a big man who was lying in a pool of blood. Puff! The big man suddenly opened his mouth and spat out a mist of blood. Then he lay on the ground. This time, he was really dead. Seeing this, the corner of Leo's eyes twitched. It was not a pity that he fled at the last minute. More importantly, the other party's action was obviously to silence him. Looking at Tang An indifferently, he took a few steps forward and subconsciously stepped back. He tightly held Suya's throat and shouted sternly, "Stop! Don't come over, or I will strangle her to death." Tang An responded and stopped. He looked at Suya, whose face was red because of the choking. He paused and helplessly spread out his hands. "Don't you want to say something? For example, leave quickly, don't worry about me, take care of my brother, or something." Alas, now the atmosphere is completely lacking. Not to mention Leo, even Suya could not help but be a little dumbfounded. At this moment, Tang An shook his head. Life is like a play. It all depends on acting skills, comrades. Before the slightly regretful tone could completely dissipate, Tang An's figure flashed and instantly appeared in front of Leo. As if in slow motion, he stretched out his right hand and calmly grabbed Leo's tightly clenched wrist. Then he slightly raised his left hand and pinched Leo's throat. Gotcha! Everything was settled. Chapter 701. In the dark of the moon, it was the time to kill, and the wind was strong. Tang An had killed a lot of people tonight, and it would be an understatement to say that his hands were bloody. In this way, taking advantage of the omnipresent cold wind in the northern wilderness, he naturally did not mind lighting a fire and completely erasing this tribe. After making such a big move, Tang An naturally had to bring forward the departure schedule. There was nothing much to say. He told Suya some things to pay attention to, and then disguised the two of them to hide their original beautiful and handsome faces. Then they parted ways. There were some feelings of parting, but it was quickly diluted by the joy of returning to Bran. In addition, after being an assassin for a long time, he had gradually become indifferent to emotions. Soon, Tang An collected his emotions, left the blazing background behind him, and rushed towards the south. Although there were no feelings, there were still some feelings. He didn't know why, but when he saw Brandy swearing that he would become strong and not embarrass Brandy, he felt that something was amiss. Tang An suddenly had some expectations in his heart. Maybe one day, this little guy would really live up to his name, Bran Enemy? It would be quite interesting to think about. Although the journey back was very long, there were no twists and turns. This was inevitable. The northern wilderness was too vast. With Tang An's camouflage and hiding ability, as long as his brain did not suddenly short-circuit and he did not crash in a fierce eagle tribe's base camp and be recognized, the so-called blockade was basically a joke to him. Relatively speaking, how to pass through the Bran border was still a problem. Well, it was just a small problem. The Bran border stretched for thousands of miles, and it was impossible to be heavily guarded everywhere. Otherwise, there would not be northern wilderness barbarians who came to Bran to rob when there was a shortage of food in winter. Without a doubt, there were definitely flaws in this border, and there were quite a few of them. However, Tang An did not intend to look for these flaws. Firstly, it was a waste of time. Secondly, any place with weak defense was basically far from the town. Tangin returned to Bran after such a long time, and he was in the dark. Naturally, he had to find a town to inquire about the current situation of the Greycoat army. Therefore, since he did not want to go through so much trouble, he naturally had to use his brain. Of course, this was not difficult for Tang. More than 10 days later, at a border checkpoint in Zichen's defense area that was still quite lively. In the morning, the city gates were wide open, and people coming and going. It was not just the Bran people. With a casual glance, one could also see many burly northern wilderness people. There was no conflict of any kind. As if they did not see each other's eyes, this scene seemed very strange, but it was also very harmonious. This was because the people of the northern wilderness were not soldiers, but merchants. It was true that Bran and the northern wilderness were at loggerheads, but this did not affect the trade between the two countries, especially during a period of peace. After all, they were two completely different regions, and each side would need something from the other. Therefore, it was naturally necessary to trade with each other. Of course, there were very few checkpoints like this. Not only were there strict restrictions on the number of people and goods, but it was also very unstable. Basically, when there was a war, in order to prevent spies from sneaking in, it would be completely sealed. This was also the reason why smuggling was so rampant. At this time, a medium-sized northern wilderness caravan, after being checked, slowly passed through the main gate of the checkpoint and entered Bran's territory. Just as they entered, the door of a dusty carriage in the middle of the caravan opened, and a beautiful woman with delicate facial features lightly jumped down. She looked back at the checkpoint gate, took a light breath, and smiled. "Hi, Huhan Sanenbach." That's right. The woman who was still dressed as Lan Shah was Tang In. The method he chose was to enter Bran through the official route. This way, he could reach the city as quickly as possible without any trouble. Of course, this kind of official caravan generally did not dare to casually bring people, mainly because they were worried that political issues would affect business. But it had to be said that Lan Shah's disguise was very good. With a simple excuse of visiting relatives, no one had the heart to refuse a beautiful woman's request. And the people of the northern wilderness were also people, so naturally, they were no exception. Who was San? A young northern wilderness man dressed in Bran clothes, who was also the person in charge of the caravan, stepped out from the checkpoint gate and asked curiously, "Oh, it's nothing, thank you." Tang and acted like a lady and smiled. "Thank you for letting me into the caravan. I know this has caused you some trouble." The young northern wilderness man shook his head and shrugged nonchalantly. "It's okay. It's just a small problem. The Bran people are greedy by nature. As long as you pay a small sum of money, they don't care where you come from or what your identity is." "Huh?" Tang In smiled and nodded. She did not refute. That was indeed the case. Every person who came to the northern wilderness to do business had their identity recorded in Bran. Logically speaking, people like Tang In who did not belong to the caravan would not be able to enter. However, there were no absolutes in this world. Those who were able to guard this desolate border checkpoint were naturally not soldiers with a strong background. With the glorious idea of earning a little bit of money, as long as the money was in place, they would turn a blind eye to most things that did not cross the line. After chatting for a while, Tang In formally said goodbye. She bowed and said, "Thank you for your generous help. You made my journey very relaxing and enjoyable. I think it's time to say goodbye. I wish you a smooth career." Thank you." The young northern wilderness man nodded with a smile. After a pause, he hesitated and said, "Miss Shay, I also wish you a smooth family visit. I don't mean any harm. If there's a problem with your family visit and you don't have anyone here, you can choose to come back to me. If you're not used to life in the northern wilderness, I also have a place to live here." This was a subtle confession. Tang Un's mouth twitched. He touched his nose and interrupted, "Sorry, you're very charming." But I'm really sorry." It's okay. It's not your fault. I was being presumptuous." Although he tried to hide it, The young northern wilderness man's expression was still a little regretful. After the atmosphere cooled down a little, he still asked, "Why?" "Because our gender is incompatible." "Sorry, gender incompatibility can be cultivated slowly." Ah. Taking advantage of the northern wilderness man's stiff expression, Tang nodded politely, turned around, walked into the crowd, and disappeared instantly. A moment later, in a remote corner of the checkpoint, Tang decisively took off his disguise and returned to his original appearance. He was speechless. He had to admit that everything had two sides. For example, this realistic lawn Sha disguise brought a lot of convenience to Tang Yin. On the other hand, it had a drawback that made him not know whether to laugh or cry. After skipping this small episode, Tang Yin wandered around the checkpoint. As expected, he didn't find a place that could provide information like the Thieves' Union. So, he took a few wallets and bought a horse to leave again. He then rushed to the city behind. After about 3 hours, Tang Yin arrived at the gate of a medium-sized city. This time, he had the face of the brand, so he naturally didn't encounter any difficulties and entered the city smoothly. After asking around, he went straight to the Thieves' Union. Not long after, looking at the familiar double dagger symbol in front of him, Tang Yin felt a little emotional. He couldn't help but think of the scene where he worked hard to upgrade the system in Lian City. He shook his head and stepped into the hall of the Thieves' Union. Tang Yin's crystal ball that could prove his identity as an assassin was destroyed in the series of battles. So, he went straight to the counter, knocked on the table, and said to the guild members who looked over, "I need some information about the Gray Coat Army. The time limit is within 3 months." The Thieves' Union had this service, but after all, it was an official organization. The information that could be obtained here naturally wouldn't be too secretive. It was basically information that could be found in the newspapers. If there wasn't any information here, then they could only issue a mission and ask the thieves to complete it. However, from Tang Yin's point of view, the Gray Coat Army and the brand were now in a cooperative relationship, so it was impossible for there to be such information. Sure enough, 3 gold coins, sir. The price wasn't considered expensive. Tang Yin casually bid 3 gold coins. After waiting for a while, the guild member handed over a thick stack of information. Tang Yin frowned slightly. He didn't know why, but he suddenly felt that the guild member was looking at him strangely. However, he didn't think too much about it. He took the information and walked to the side to find a place to sit down and slowly read it. What Tang Yin didn't know was that when he left, the guild member first raised his head and looked at the wanted poster hanging high on the wall of the hall. Then, he glanced at him a few times. His throat moved, and he swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Chapter 702. Arrest warrants were very common in the Bran Empire. The greater a person's ability, the greater their responsibility. This statement was correct, but it was also one-sided, because it neglected one point, and that was the amount of trouble one could cause. With the existence of Do Qi, magic, and other magical powers, the other world was destined to not be a harmonious world. Because when one had the power to override the majority of people, one's thoughts, values, and so on would change. Not everyone would have a positive outlook to serve the empire and protect their beliefs. There would also be thoughts of pursuing wealth, glory, noble status, and other fame and fortune, or even enjoy the pleasure of bullying the good and approaching the evil, and the pleasure of destroying the weak. There was no doubt that the latter thoughts would never become mainstream, and would only become an obstacle to the state's goal of stability. Therefore, conflicts arose, and arrest warrants were born. Of course, there were many types of arrest warrants, and the level was mainly determined by the target. Starting a fight in the city, hurting the innocent, or even an assassin who killed people as a profession, of course, would become a wanted target. However, this kind of arrest warrants level was very low, and its effect was minimal. For example, if an assassin killed a gang leader, even if someone came to report the case, the attitude of the police station was mostly indifferent. But if an aristocrat was killed, the situation was naturally different. Of course, people like bows who were caught and killed were not counted. This was an exception, and it was also very rare. However, if an extremely vicious person provoked the Empire, the Temple of Light, and other big forces, then the level of the arrest warrant would naturally be the highest, and even the entire continent would be wanted. Moreover, the people chasing after the assassin would not be limited to the forces themselves, and some warriors who were greedy for the high bounty would also be tempted. For example, the Thieves' Hall right now. The notice board with countless arrest warrants was above Tang Yin's head, but because these things were very common, Tang Yin did not notice it when he came in. Now that he was quietly sitting below and flipping through the information, he naturally could not see it because of the angle. In fact, in the beginning, other than the guild member, no one else noticed Tang Yin. But it had to be said that the position that Tang Yin had unintentionally chosen was too perfect. His portrait was hanging on the red wanted poster at the top of the notice board, while he himself was sitting peacefully below. What kind of spirit was this? What kind of mental illness was this? First, a few bandits paused as they passed by. They frowned and looked at Tang Yin's familiar face. Then, they subconsciously looked up at the wanted poster and looked at each other. Their expressions instantly became extremely strange. Soon, this atmosphere spread, and the Thieves' Hall gradually became quiet. At this time, Tang Yin's expression became even more gloomy and shocked. It wasn't that he noticed the change in the atmosphere around him. In fact, all his attention was on the data. Had someone in the Gray Coat Army betrayed them? The City of Dawn had been destroyed, and the reinforcements at the front lines had been wiped out. How was that possible? Why? Rosa was dead. A series of shocking news came one after another. Even someone as calm as Tang Yin was now a little confused. Wasn't it just a few months? What was going on? Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Tang Yin quickly flipped to the back, trying to find the source of these changes. Soon, his hands paused, and a line of big words came into view. A member of the Gray Coat Army sneak attacked and killed more than 10 clergymen of the Temple of Light. At this time, a bandit walked in front of him and greeted him with a bright smile. "Hi, Tang Yin." This was a probing question. The bandit's idea was very simple. If Tang Yin was really the person on the wanted poster, then for the sake of the double bounty of the Brand Empire and the Temple of Light, it was naturally worth it to make a move. Of course, a person who could be pursued by the Temple of Light in such a flustered and exasperated manner was definitely not someone to be trifled with. However, riches were always found in danger. The opportunity was right in front of him. Instead of missing it, it was better to take the initiative. This bandit thought that his strength was not bad. So when the people around him hesitated, he decisively came in front of Tang Yin. With a loud laugh, the bandit looked at the information on the Gray Coat Army in Tang Yin's hands. There was no doubt in his heart that he was certain. The smile on his face became even brighter. With a flip of his wrist in the narrow space, a flash of light quickly pierced towards Tang Yin's forehead. Ruthless, decisive, direct, and the most important thing was that it was unexpected and had a decisive temperament. It was undeniable that this bandit's assassination was perfect. If he had not met Tang Yin, looking up with a slightly dazed expression, Tang Yin raised his right hand like a phantom and accurately grabbed the bandit's wrist. With a flip of the hand, the dagger was in Tang Yin's hand, and he stabbed forward. Poof! His fluid movements seemed to have been completed subconsciously. In the eyes of the surrounding bandits, it was a blur. Then they saw the bold bandit looking down at the familiar dagger in his heart with a bright smile on his face. He staggered back and fell to the ground with a loud thud. Whoosh! In an instant, all the bandits in the hall suddenly stood up. Their faces were similarly stunned and shocked. Damn it! The guild member sitting behind the counter cursed and stood up to leave. In fact, he had already sent someone to inform the church in the city. He believed that it would not be long before this place was heavily surrounded. But that greedy bandit had disrupted his plan. Wiping away the hot blood splattered on his eyes due to the close-range kill, Tang Yin's gaze swept across the surrounding bandits. His long and narrow eyes slowly narrowed. He casually threw away the information in his hand and slowly stood up. A few bandits were moving back without leaving a trace. These were the ones with good eyesight. After all, although the bounty was tempting, they still needed to be alive to take it. However, most of them were still hesitant and watching in place. They were reluctant to give up the generous bounty. The opportunity was hard to come by, and the opponent was only one person. After standing up straight, Tang In did not take the initiative to attack. Instead, he turned sideways and looked up at the big red wanted notice hanging at the top of the notice board. A common face without any distinguishing features, with somewhat conspicuous long and narrow eyes. He licked his suddenly dry lips and sighed softly. The drawing is not bad. It's really King similar. Behind him, dozens of blade lights were rapidly approaching. At the same time, in the port city between the north and south of the Bran Empire, primeval city, the iron anchor was retracted. The giant ship with several layers of hulls trembled slightly and slowly sailed away from the port. At the side of the ship, a curly-haired old man in a luxurious robe looked at the northern sky in a daze and was speechless. "Big brother, have you decided? Where should our family go?" Not far behind him, a slightly haggard, middle-aged man stepped forward. "Family?" Shaking his head, the curly-haired old man had a self-deprecating smile on his face. He sighed softly and said, "A family that even has to change its surname is not a noble family. Enoch, we are all sinners of the family." The middle-aged man could not help but be silent. After a moment, he opened his mouth and said, "At least we are now earls." "Yes, at least earls." He murmured in agreement. It should have been a happy result, but the curly-haired old man did not have the slightest hint of excitement on his face. He was only at a loss. "We're also bait that has been abandoned." Yes, these two people were Bosco and Enoch. After the Battle of Dawn City, the Bosco family had undoubtedly made a great contribution. They had also received the title promised by the Bran Empire. After this incident, in order to prevent retaliation, they should have left the northern region as soon as possible. However, that was not the case. The Bran Empire's encirclement and suppression operation this time was very ambitious. The expected result was to completely eliminate the Grey Coat Army. However, the outcome was not as expected. Most of the soldiers and civilians in Dawn City successfully escaped. Since this matter was a foregone conclusion, the Bran Empire simply drove away the remnants of the Grey Coat Army while requesting the cooperation of the Bosco family to eliminate the scattered secret strongholds of the Grey Coat Army. The so-called strongholds were, in fact, where most of the family members of the Grey Coat Army lived. After all, rebellion was a dangerous matter. Therefore, not all members of the Grey Coat Army brought their family members with them. For safety reasons, many of their family members were actually concentrated in countless villages and towns. And what Bosco and the rest had to do was to point out these places one by one, and then the Empire's soldiers would eliminate them. Of course, they were forced to do this, but who would care? There was no doubt that the Bosco family's actions had completely offended the Grey Coat Army. However, the Grey Coat Army had not been completely wiped out and even retained most of their strength. Therefore, one could imagine the days that the Bosco family would face in the future. It was also because of this that Bosco had no choice but to change his family's surname in shame, hoping to conceal his identity and avoid the revenge of the Grey Coat Army. After a moment of silence, Enoch asked again, "Brother, have you decided where the family is going?" Bosco's old face twitched. He seemed to be a little angry, but then he endured it and said in a deep voice, "Anyway, it's a small city on the eastern coastline of the Empire. There's no difference." Of course, this was not the best choice. In fact, in order to avoid future retaliation to the greatest extent, the Bosco family should move to the capital of the Bran. They were now earls and had the qualifications to move. To be honest, this was also Bosco's previous plan. However, a guy named Philip in the capital jumped out and arrogantly said that as long as he saw the Bosco family, he would kill them. There was no need for any reason. They only needed to know that Philip had a high status. The Bosco family's escape route was directly cut off, and they could only choose to go to the desolate border of the Empire. Of course, Enoch also knew the reason. He shook his head and comforted Bosco. In fact, it's not bad for the family to go there. It won't be so easy to find. Maybe. Bosco's mood was still gloomy. Then, as if he remembered something, he asked, "What about Michaud? Is he also on the ship?" "Yes." Enoch's face suddenly sank, and he said angrily, "I just confirmed that he's on the ship. Brother, that Michaud has been following us and refused our cooperation proposal. What does he want to do?" Bosco shook his head. Who knows what he's thinking? He almost had a conflict with the people of the Temple of Light. Madman. After a pause, Bosco frowned and said, "He's always a hidden danger. We have to find a chance to get rid of them. At least, we can't let them know the location of the family." Before his voice died away, a sudden laughter came. "Ha! It's useless. You can't get rid of them." Enoch abruptly turned his head when he heard the voice. He saw a young man with a feminine face leaning against the side of the cabin not far away. The young man was curling his lips and chuckling at them. There was a hint of madness in his expression. Michaud, you mother asterisk her." Bosco reached out and grabbed the extremely angry Enoch. He frowned and looked at Michaud, then slowly asked, "Why? Follow you all the time?" It's very simple." Michaud shrugged and said with a smile, "Only by following you guys will I be able to meet the boss. Tang In, you're also a traitor. Even if Tang In can really find you, you can't escape death." "Yes." Michaud spread out his hands. "Isn't this the result I want?" "You." Bosco's eyes twitched, and he turned his head. "Madman." Thank you. It's a very appropriate description." Chapter 703. In the afternoon, on the streets of the city, large groups of garrison cavalry, city guards, and even white-robed clergymen of the Temple of Light appeared in the sights of the citizens from time to time. They looked hurried and vigilant, as if they were looking for something. This was on the surface. In the shadows that the citizens could not see, gangs, bandits, mercenaries, bounty hunters, and so on were also scurrying around the city, looking for something. However, they looked much more excited, and their eyes were shining as if there were gold coins hidden in them. The atmosphere was restless and sticky, as if this medium-sized city was covered in a layer of sticky spider webs. South City, in a remote street, at the entrance of an alley, two mercenaries met unexpectedly, as if they were familiar with each other. After seeing each other, they were stunned at first, then looked at each other and smiled. Everything was understood without words. Your mercenary group is also looking? Nonsense. Aren't you guys the same? Hee. Be careful that you don't have the life to receive the reward. I heard that this morning, that person single-handedly killed his way out of the Hall of Thieves. TSK, blood flowed everywhere, and there were countless casualties. Your news is outdated. Did you know that not long ago, the white-robed, gold-rimmed mage from the church and a few of his peers were killed by him? Do you know what this means? What? Idiot. This means that that person doesn't care about our battle array at all. He's still killing people for fun. Hiss, this pervert. Then why are you still looking? Aren't you afraid of falling into his hands? F***CK. If we're afraid of this, how can we be mercenaries? I've licked blood from blades before. After a pause, he changed the topic. Of course, in terms of strength, we definitely can't beat him, so we need to use our brains. Hey, since we're in the same business, don't say that I didn't warn you. You better not think about the bounty. Now we just need to find him and then pass the news to the Temple of Light, the Garrison Hall, and so on, and earn some money. Make sense? Make sense? Then I wish you good luck. You too. Just as the two mercenaries separated and walked away in different directions, a figure jumped down from the wall of the alley. It was Tang In, who looked a little upset. What the mercenary said just now was not false. With just the dozens of thieves and assassins in the Thieves' Association who were blinded by the bounty, it was naturally impossible for them to stop Tang In. However, he still stayed in the city, not because he wanted to kill people for fun, but because there were some things he had to figure out. The so-called killing of the Divine Hall mages was actually an interrogation by torture. Tang Yin had to confirm whether the light tracking spell on him had expired or lost its effect. As for the mercenaries he killed later on, it was because he wanted to know where the information was sold in the city. Regarding the destruction of the City of Dawn, the Bandits Guild's information was completely official. It was too superficial. What Tang Yin wanted to know was the detailed inside story, which could only be obtained from an intelligence dealer who specialized in this field. To be honest, Tang Yin was in a very bad mood right now. His lament at the charming Fox branch was not just for show. Tang Yin was really tired. He was tired of this life of endless assassination and escape. Moreover, after killing Sessman, Tang Yin did not have anything to worry about in the other world. His thoughts were clear. He just wanted to find a place to settle down, marry a beautiful woman, and drink and have fun with his friends like David and Fry. This kind of life was really good. It was also due to Tang Yin's peaceful nature. The blood of freedom flowed in his bones. Especially after experiencing such frequent bloody storms. He understood the true meaning of a simple life even more. Tang Yin returned to Bran with such thoughts. Who knew that he would be hit on the head before he could even find a place to stay? He was wanted by the entire continent. F***CK? You're not giving me a way out. Don't force me, bastard. Rubbing his head, Tang Yin's face was a little twisted. He let out a few long breaths. Bang! He heavily punched the wall before slowly calming down. He shook his head and identified the decaying houses around him. Tang Yin expressionlessly came to a dark wooden door with a squid-like pattern painted on it. He raised his hand and knocked on it. Knock, knock, knock. Knock, knock, knock. He knocked a few times, but there was no response. Turning his head, Tang Yin's ears twitched. He impatiently frowned. Open the door if you don't want me to break in. After a pause, a voice came from behind the door. It was a little angry. Don't King bother me again. Who knows where that person is now? It was obvious that many people had come to find him before, and the person they were asking about was probably Tang Yin. Open the door. This is the last warning. Creak. The dark wooden door was violently pulled open by the person inside. A middle-aged man with an unshaven beard stuck his head out and roared angrily. King said, I don't know. It's you? Damn it. Damn it. Which King bastard leaked my address? Seeing Tang Yin's face, the sloppy middle-aged man was shocked. He instinctively wanted to close the dark wooden door. Ha! Tang Yin reached out and pulled the door, but it did not move. He nodded. Looks like you know who I am. That's simple. Give me what I want, and I'll leave. Otherwise, well, don't hate those who leaked your address, because they're already dead. The middle-aged man could not help but tremble. He bitterly said, Brother Tang Yin, the whole city is looking for you. Why don't you find a place to hide? Why are you here? I'm here for information. I want all the information about the City of Dawn being destroyed. You won't disappoint me, right? Scratching his head, the middle-aged man sighed. He knew that he could not hide. He looked around, then opened the wooden door and let Tang Yin in. Come in and talk. You're making me worried by the door. He closed the wooden door and patted his chest. Don't worry. There's no problem with the information. I'm an octopus. As long as you can pay, I'll give you any information. I don't have any money, Tang Yin said calmly as he looked at the messy decorations in the room. He really did not have any money. He had almost used up all the wallets that he had taken. He could not afford to pay for such confidential information. That's not what I meant. I don't dare to take your money. I beg you. After we leave this room, pretend that you don't know me. I've never seen you before. Please. After a while, Tang Yin left the room through a secret door. He looked up and was confused. Michaud, what? The city was still tightly sealed. However, if Tang Yin was determined to leave, the seal would not be able to stop him. However, Tang Yin's mind was in a mess. He did not want to leave at all. He just wanted to find a place to sort out his emotions. The way to deal with it was very simple. He changed his disguise and openly booked a room in the hotel. He pulled over a chair and lay down weakly. After a while, he said silently, Assassin system. The scene changed instantly, and Tang Yin was in the system space. Suddenly, ding, the system's long-term quest. Twilight of Light. Overthrow the Temple of Light and collapse the faith. Ding, the system's random quest. Betrayal. Misho, the Oath Breaker, must pay the price. Ding, obtained 80 points of blood energy. Ding, obtained blood energy. Next were the notifications of obtaining blood energy, which was what Tang In obtained from killing today. There was no point in doing so, and it was easily blocked. However, the system's synthesized voice was different. Even though Tang In was not in the mood, he could not help but be stunned. Well, the system's quest either did not come or came in pairs. A long-term quest? You're lucky. The old butler nodded when he heard this, revealing a rare look of joy. Tang In half sat on the ground and said in a dull voice, "What do you mean? A long-term quest is very difficult. You only need to complete the stage quest after a period of time. And because it's a long-term quest, you don't have to worry about any punishment if you can't complete it." The old butler calmly explained, "For example, overthrowing the Temple of Light. You definitely can't complete it in a short time. But if you kill 100 clerics, it will also shake the foundation of the Temple of Light. Maybe you will complete the first stage of the quest. At that time, the system will give you an experience reward or something." Pause for a while. This is why I said that you're lucky. Haven't you been lacking experience recently to upgrade the system? Now the opportunity is here. I don't want to know this now. Tang In looked up blankly with his hands on the ground and his body leaning back. "Old butler, why do you think Misho chose to betray me?" You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.